Welcome to novelsaudio.com. We hope you have a relaxing and enjoyable time.
Second Chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 1 December 15 Eli Ward counted 4 MAGA flags on his parents' street, and those were just the ones he could see in the dark. They were mostly in tatters, having weathered years of Florida thunderstorms, some so raggedy as to be illegible. There were yard signs, too, one bent completely backward on its coat hanger legs. Oh, and a couple matching bumper stickers slapped on the backs of SUVs. In a perverse way, Eli was comforted by all this. At least those households were displaying their intentions. It was the homes with empty yards that made him wonder. The truck trundled by a house that was positively festooned with star-spangled merchandise. Eli craned his neck to take in the scene on the driver's side. Jesus, they'd decorated the signage with red Christmas lights, giving everything a decidedly demonic cast. It wasn't the first time he'd seen a fervent display of right-wing sentiment. He'd been on the road during election season, when there were pockets of it everywhere. The Midwest, the South, upstate New York, but it felt different here in Newport Stephen, where he'd grown up. He glanced at his cousin in the driver's seat, but Max didn't seem to register the house, eyes firmly on the road. When had the kid gotten old enough to drive? Eli's most enduring memories of Max were from Facebook photos of a toddler picking clover. It just didn't compute with the lanky beanpole in combat boots and a billion necklaces who'd picked him up from the airport. Bit of a queer vibe, but who knew what teens were like these days? He should probably make an effort to find out, at least when it came to his own flesh and blood. Eli cleared his throat. So, how's school going? Great opener. He only sounded about 900 years old. Max gave an eye roll because that's what teens did. It wasn't because Eli was irredeemably uncool, surely. It'll be better in a few months when it's over. That gave Eli pause. Wait, you're graduating this year? Seriously? I'm 18, Max drawled, guiding the truck along a snake-like bend. I know the Florida public school system has improved much since you were in it, but they did teach me simple addition. Eli resisted the urge to fling himself from the slow-moving vehicle to hide in a ditch, where he could spend the rest of his twilight years without being sassed by young'uns. And how is Port Stephen Prep these days? Seemed polite to ask, like the school was some mutual acquaintance of theirs. Closed, hurricane damage, Max shrugged. No one's sure when it'll reopen. Some fight about who pays for the repairs. I might have to finish the year out at Southern. That sucks, Eli offered. Not really. It's all the same, Max said. Couldn't argue with that. Eli looked out the window, letting his breath make a circle of fog on the glass. The house he'd grown up in finally came into view. For the first time in almost 20 years, Eli was back. The driveway was packed with cars, so Max parked on the street. Eli took his time unbuckling his seatbelt, staring at his parents' house through the passenger window. Of all the houses he'd seen so far, it was the most decorated for the holidays. Eli's dad had always gone a little overboard with the lights back in the day, but this was something else. Eli got out of the truck to take in the full effect of the Christmas display. Strand after strand of multicolored lights flickered in a repeating pattern. The eaves were dripping in lights, as were the azalea bushes out front, and the squat cabbage palm in the flower bed, and the mailbox, and the arch of the carport, and a million other things, probably, that Eli's overwhelmed eyes hadn't yet noticed. A half-dozen holiday characters sat on the lawn, including a plastic Santa wearing a Panama hat and an inflatable Rudolph with a glowing red nose. The rest of the reindeer were represented by pink flamingos with felt antlers glued to their heads. Dad really went all out, huh? He said to Max, who was getting his suitcase from the bed of the truck. You should have seen it a couple years ago. Max slammed the tailgate shut. It was like Disney World. Tons of people came to take photos. A shrug. Uncle Wen said this year he wanted to scale it back, tasteful or whatever. Eli watched as a robotic deer outlined in bright white lights lifted its head from the front yard's grass, swiveled it around exorcist style, and apparently satisfied that no Christmas predators were close by, lowered back down to Fakiat. Huh, Eli said. Tasteful. He took his suitcase from Max. As they neared the wreath-bedecked front door, Eli could hear the clamor of overlapping voices and Christmas music. He took a deep breath and held his suitcase handle in a white-knuckled grip. Why had he flown into night of all nights? He should have waited one more day. He should have found another couch to crash on. He shouldn't even be here. No, this was going to be fine. There were worse things than a family holiday party. A party was just a performance, and he was used to performing. Sure, he hadn't actually been on stage in over a year, but it was like riding a bike. Probably. He hadn't done that in decades, so he couldn't be sure. The door was unlocked as usual, and Eli stepped inside. He had just enough time to get a vague impression of the house. Christmas kitsch on every available surface and stuffed to the gills with people, most of whom he didn't recognize. Probably his parents, friends, and coworkers. A few turned to give him polite nods, clutching their red Solo cups. Bluetooth speakers scattered around the room belted out that song that went, "So this is Christmas?" The John Lennon version, not saline, because life wasn't fair. Eli's home. A woman with gray-streaked hair swooped out of the throng of people, caftan flapping. Her Bakelite bangles, red and green, naturally clinked as she wrapped Eli in a fierce hug. She still wore plumeria perfume. "You made it," Cora Ward said right into his ear. "I made it," Eli said, hugging back with one arm. She felt smaller than he remembered. Were his parents shrinking? He certainly wasn't getting any bigger. The tea had done all it was going to do at this point. He closed his eyes and tried to enjoy a moment of floral-scented comfort. "Hey, son?" Giddy emphasis on the son. Eli opened his eyes to find his dad standing by with his arms held wide. What hair remained on his head was grayer than the last time Eli had seen him last year. He wore a navy sweater vest over his long-sleeved button-down, and his glasses were horn-rimmed. His mustache was neatly trimmed, but not too thin because he felt that was the mark of a pervert, which Eli still thought about every time he trimmed his own Selleck-esque stash. In short, Wendell Ward looked like a librarian because he was one. Cora had been a librarian, too, until she'd retired the year prior. "Hi, Dad." Eli released his mom to hug him. A flurry of activity followed. "Where's Max? Max, get in here." Close the door. "The cat's been trying to get out all night." "How was the flight?" "Let me take that bag." No, I insist." "Was traffic bad coming up from the airport?" "I swear, gets worse every year." "Last week." "My God, what did you pack?" "Bricks." "Max, do me a favor, sweetie, put this in the back bedroom for your cousin. It was shut down for 4 days, every single lane. That's why I always take the turnpike." "No, the back bedroom, that's the front." "When you can't take the turnpike to the airport. It doesn't go to the airport." "Yes, it does. You just have to exit before the dog track." "Wow," Eli said in a desperate bid to interrupt their double act. "Look at all these old photos, huh?" It was the first thing that caught his eye, the only thing he thought might derail another hour of patter about the Florida highway system. He slipped between his mom and Dad to examine the framed photographs on the wall of the sitting room. A few partygoers obligingly stepped aside to give him a better view. His mom took the bait. She cooed at the pictures of Eli in 80s and 90s film of varying quality. There was a second little kid in many of the photos. Black hair, gangly legs, oversized t-shirt. "You two were the cutest," she said, tapping a fingernail against the glass that covered the other kid's tousled head. "Do you keep in touch at all? Facebook, that kind of thing?" "No," Eli said, only half conscious of the question. "No, I don't do social media anymore." He stared at the figure in the most central photograph. Aunt Honey and Uncle Hank's wedding. Must have been 10 or 11, wearing a poofy purple dress. He didn't bother trying to discern a familiar nose or a tilt of the mouth. There was nothing about the kid in the picture that looked like him except the haunted look in the eyes that seemed to scream, "Get me out of here." That, Eli could sympathize with. His dad's here if you want to say hello. Wendell pointed over to the family room, where a dark-haired figure was standing next to a folding table covered in finger foods, chatting with Aunt Katie. "He still lives over on Papaya." Eli could see only the back of Mr. Wu's head, and he had no plans to see much more than that. This day was stressful enough. "Yeah, maybe later," he said. Wendell was called away to mediate a debate between his friends, but Cora stayed right where she was, like she couldn't bear to take her eyes off Eli. She was practically bubbling over with excitement. "So how is the new job going?" she asked. Eli cracked his neck side to side. "Oh. You know, there was only so much you could say when you didn't want to say anything. Because the truth was, there was no job. The truth was, after having a decent career in various writers' rooms for years, all that had evaporated like so much canned milk. The truth was Eli's plane ticket had been one way because his apartment in Brooklyn was currently home to a subletter, and Eli had no idea how or when he'd be going back. The truth was Eli was possibly stuck in Florida for the foreseeable future while he got his shit together. But if he tried to explain this to his mom in the middle of her annual Christmas party, he was going to have to tell her how he was a huge disappointment. And then she would cry, which would make his dad cry, which would make baby Jesus cry, and Eli was going to throw up just thinking about it. "It's going," he finally choked out. His mom beamed at him, oblivious to his internal whirlwind. "You'll have to tell me all about it later. I'm sorry I never caught that last show you worked on, but you know how your father and I don't care for raunchy humor." "Yeah, I know." His parents subsisted on a media diet of public radio and the odd rerun of Antiques Roadshow, and he didn't expect them to start watching M-rated streaming dramedies simply because their only child was writing the material. Or had been. Cora sighed gustily. Working in television must be so interesting. Much more interesting than anything in our sleepy little town. I hope you don't get bored while you're here. In the dining room, someone dropped a cup. His parents' cat, a hefty ginger named Sweet Potato, the third of his name, tried his best to lick up the sticky concoction that had spattered onto the floor before being shooed away by the guests. Eli hoped that would require his mom's attention, but Wendell stepped in to clean it up instead. "Hey, hey!" A meaty hand landed on Eli's shoulder, making him startle. "The prodigal, whatever returns." "Son," Cora said in a sing-song voice. Eli turned to face his mother's younger brother. "Hi, Uncle Hank, how have you been?" Hank's red face stretched into a grin. Getting by, getting by. How's life in the big city? You doing all right in that crime-riddled hellhole?" "Ridden," Eli's mom said. "It's crime-ridden, and Eli lives in a nice neighborhood, not one of the bad ones." "Mom," if he cringed any harder, Eli was going to implode. Uncle Hank leaned in like he was imparting state secrets. "You heard about the new law they're trying to pass here?" "Yeah, Uncle Hank, I heard," Eli said. "I don't live under a rock, so, yeah." The proposed law was the subject of opening monologues on the late-night circuit, a topic of conversation for internet trolls, a headline for days when there was nothing else happening. It was the brainchild of the governor, a guy who looked like undercooked pizza dough and with a haircut to match. The poorly written law prohibited cross-dressing on the campuses of state-funded schools and universities, making it illegal for biological men to wear skirts or dresses and biological women to wear pants. This last part, naturally, had caused so much confusion and uproar that the real issue, the fact that some douchebag in Tallahassee wanted to terrorize transgender people to the ends of the earth, was usurped by round-table discussions about women's lib that had all the relevance of moldy cave cheese. It was so depressing and predictable, it made Eli want to crawl into said cave, wrap himself around a cheese wheel, and sleep for a month. Ridiculous. Eli's mom clicked her tongue. They wouldn't even be able to enforce that law. Not its biggest flaw in Eli's opinion, but okay. Hank pointed at her with the hand that was holding his plastic cup. "I told Honey," I said to her, I said, "no way are they going to make my nephew wear a dress. Not even if it's like a really nice dress. I'll fight 'em, sock 'em in the mouth if they try." Amazing allyship, Uncle Hank, thank you. "I don't plan on visiting any school campuses while I'm here, though." Eli eyed the sloshing cup in Hank's hand, smelled like rum. "How many of those have you had, by the way?" "Why, do you want one? I can get you one." Cora sighed. "You know Eli is sober. You can't even have one?" Hank's eyes went wide with disbelief. "Oh, I can," Eli said. "I'll just have 9 or 10 more in quick succession, and I'd rather not spend Christmas getting my stomach pumped." It was an old punchline that Eli usually pulled out at parties. It was easier than explaining how bad his drinking had been when he first moved to New York, back in his early days on the stand-up circuit. How he'd woken up in an MRI after getting blackout drunk on 2 separate occasions. How his closest friend, Margot, had not so gently pointed out that once might be classified as a funny story to tell in green rooms, but twice was a pattern, and he should probably talk to someone about it. How therapy had pulled off his alcoholism's Scooby-Doo mask to reveal, surprise, repression, gender stuff, all the things he'd been trying to avoid his entire life. How he'd gotten sober and transitioned and pulled himself together just so he could go on Christmas vacation in a state where the leading government body was actively trying to make his life a living hell. Yeah, much better to tell a joke. Eli smiled tightly. "I'm going to get some water." He gave his uncle a manful pat on his arm. "Incredible seeing you again, Hank," he said, putting every sense of the definition into the word. The kitchen was crowded since that was where all the booze was. Eli squeezed between bodies and snagged a Zephyr Hills bottled water from the fridge, then headed for the screened-in back patio for some fresh, albeit humid, air. He closed the sliding glass door behind him. The sounds of the party were muffled instantly, and the noises of the night bugs took over. Eli listened to them trill and buzz while twisting the cap off his water bottle, then gulped it down in a long series of swallows. He just needed a second to regroup, then he could continue pretending to be fine and normal. He could feel a headache coming on. Is it possible your guilt is manifesting physically? Said a voice inside Eli's head that sounded suspiciously like the therapist he had stopped seeing when he'd lost his health insurance. Very helpful observation, Doc. Thanks for that. He paced around the porch, finishing off his water and leaving the bottle on the table. The sliding glass door opened, and Aunt Honey stuck her head out. The sounds of various wails floated onto the porch. Can I borrow you? Her soft voice held a note of resignation. Sweet Potato got outside. We're organizing a search party. Eli felt deeply for the cat. He also wanted to escape this party, even if it meant running into the scrub pine wilderness. He left the porch via the screen door that led into the side yard, his aunt right behind him. Christmas lights and cell phone flashlights provided pools of illumination. Eli sensed movement on the edges of his parents' property, but he could make out only vague shapes while his eyes adjusted. The voices of the partygoers called out in different directions. Sweet Potato, come here, boy, come on, Tater. He's a cat, not a dog, Aunt Honey informed the person closest to her in the back flower bed. He won't come when you call. Her tone made it clear she found this a huge defect. I think I found him, someone shouted. Then, nope, never mind, it's a plastic bag. Oh, dear God. Eli rubbed his forehead with the heel of his palm. Clearly, he'd picked the wrong decade to stop drinking. A figure appeared from behind the crepe myrtles and jogged up to him. It turned out to be Eli's dad, his glasses fogged from his exertion. Can you give me a hand? Hank fell into the swale. What? Eli couldn't hide his surprise. The swale, the gutter-like ditch that ran along the front of the properties all throughout the neighborhood to collect excess rainwater, could only be half a foot deep at the most. Can't he just stand back up? Muddy patch, his foot stuck. He grimaced. I think he's had a few. You have got to be kidding me. Eli was tempted to suggest they leave him there for the rest of the evening, but he knew that would probably not go over well. The Ward family was famously polite in that buttoned-up, mainstream liberal kind of way. Eli's parents had no doubt watched a PBS docuseries on the dangers of leaving uncles stuck in swales. Several yards away, somewhere close to the street, Eli heard a collection of grunts followed by a wet pop. Got I am, Max hollered into the shadows. Cries of relief came from all corners, so Max amended. My dad, not the cat. Huffs of disappointment from the Greek chorus. Eli's head throbbed. Aunt Katie sauntered by with a margarita glass in hand. It wouldn't be Christmas without Hank making an ass of himself, she muttered to no one in particular. Sis, can you please at least pretend to be looking for the cat? Wendell called after her. Eli was about to suggest opening a can of tuna, when a creamsicle burst of color rocketed out of the underbrush. Eli's dad yodeled in triumph. There he is! He took off running after Sweet Potato with more verve than Eli would have given him credit for. Eli stood where he was and let everyone barrel past him as they pursued the escaped cat. Too many cooks, he decided. Eli's mother trotted up then. Oh, there you are, sweetie. Here I am, Eli said, like he couldn't believe it either. His mom smiled at him, a hint of anxiety clouding her face. You know what? Could you do me a favor and go to the store to get more drinks? We're running low somehow. Eli looked over at the scene still unfolding by the swale, standing on tiptoe to see over some bushes. Aunt Honey was trying to swipe the mud off Uncle Hank's pants leg and was only succeeding in spreading it along the length of his khakis. Yeah, somehow. Cora followed his gaze, shaking her head. I'd ask someone else, but everyone's either had one too many or is underage. Please. She held out her keys, a confused jangle of novelty key rings and supermarket savings cards. No problem. Eli swiped the keys from her hand. Living in New York for so long meant his driving skills were likely rusty, but honestly, a fender bender sounded like heaven compared to staying at this party. Cora bobbed her head in thanks. There's a wine barn down on Route 1 where the Circuit City used to be. You know, the one they burned down for the insurance money? That was never proven in court, Eli said automatically. Why was this town so goddamn weird? His mom dug her MasterCard out of a pocket in her caftan. Beer, wine, some of the hard stuff, mixers, oh, and some more limes. They have everything there, so you won't need to make more than one stop. Drive safe, okay? I'll be back as soon as I can. Lies. He was going to dawdle like he'd never dawdled before. From deep in the woods out back, Eli heard the yowl of a cat who presumably had been captured by many sets of hands. Second chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 2, Nick Wu stood in front of the Chardonnay section of the wine barn with his brow furrowed and his cart empty. He'd assumed that his Christmas shopping was complete, but then his beloved restaurant staff, those fuckers, had surprised their favorite general manager with a truly dizzying array of gifts consisting of shit he did not need. What would he even do with an air fryer? Who needed to fry with air when there were 3 serviceable deep-fat fryers down at the Thirsty Manatee that could cook high-calorie food as nature intended? Now, he was obligated to buy last-minute holiday presents for all the people who had gotten him a present, which was a stressful fulfillment of the social contract, and yet another reason for him to consider Christmas time to be the absolute worst. Nick had intended to get this chore done earlier, but he'd been delayed at the intersection where Magnolia met Route 1 because a gopher tortoise was crossing the road. Nick had risked salmonella by carrying the reptile to the other side to save it from being flattened into a pancake by oncoming traffic. Because he was a good guy, he reminded himself. Good guys saved tortoises from certain death. They reciprocated gifts. They didn't have meltdowns in the Chardonnay aisle 17 minutes before closing time because they couldn't decide which bottle of wine best said thank you for the air fryer I'll never use. Nick rubbed a hand over his tired face. He needed to pull himself together. The season was ramping up, with snowbirds starting to trickle down south, filling the tables at the Manatee. More business meant more work, longer hours. Though if Nick were being honest with himself, Sandra and the rest of the staff had their shifts pretty much under control. Even packed weekend dinner services were running like clockwork. The owner of the place seemed happy with the results, which was what really mattered. But it wasn't just work that was leaving him exhausted. Juggling schedules with Lori, Zoe's soccer practices and daycare, and all the stuff that came with trying to make Christmas fun for a 4-year-old, was also draining. Nick couldn't even remember being 4. Was Zoe really going to be emotionally stunted if her parents didn't get the requisite pictures of her on a mall Santa's lap before December 25th? Maybe she'd like an air fryer instead. 2 birds with 1 stone. This was getting him nowhere. Nick pushed his cart toward the sparkling section. Everyone liked bubbles, he was pretty sure. He'd grab a case of whatever mid-range bottle had the prettiest label. His shopping cart collided with something that made a metallic clang and glassy rattle. Nick whipped his head up, realizing belatedly that he'd T-boned a fellow shopper. The guy blinked at him, his own cart filled to the brim with more wine and hard liquor than Nick had ever seen outside of the Manatee's storeroom. "Sorry," Nick blurted out. "I was sorry." He backed his cart up a few feet so he could maneuver around his victim, keeping his gaze down out of embarrassment. "Wasn't paying attention." "Nick," said the guy. "Nick Wu." Nick lifted his head and took a better look at him. His eyes were wide and his mouth was open in surprise. He was short, had brown hair, a mustache about Nick's own age, maybe a little younger. He didn't look all that familiar. "Sorry, do we know each other?" "Yeah." The guy stared at him for a long beat. "We do. We do. It's me." He pointed at his own face. "You really don't recognize this mug?" Far from being offended, he seemed delighted by the prospect. His hazel eyes were shining, a grin stretching across his lips. "I'm really sorry, I can't place you," Nick said. He was still using his polite business voice in case the stranger was someone from the county health inspector's office. "It's been a long day. Refresh my memory." "Nick, not short for Nicholas, no middle name, Wu," he said in an admonishing tone. The strange man's voice dropped into a register reserved for whispered secrets. "And they say you never forget your first." Nick's brain clicked into gear. A flood of memory surged through his body. Sharing a back seat in Mrs. Cora's minivan during preschool carpools, tramping through the woods that had surrounded his house with his best friend at his side. Laughing until he puked in a Taco Bell parking lot the weekend after he got his driver's license. Sitting in the back row of the Dollar Movie Theater, a place that didn't exist anymore, and screwing up enough courage to hold someone's hand for the first time since they were little kids using the buddy system. His first kiss. His first everything. Oh my God. K. He stopped himself before he blurted out a name that he was pretty sure wasn't currently in use. The floor felt like it was dissolving under his feet. Sorry, I mean, who do I mean? Eli. Eli threw his head back and laughed long and loud. It's Eli now. Holy shit, your face. You really went on a journey, huh? That was wild. Eli. The name was new in his mouth, but it also felt strangely fitting there. He stared at what had once been the most familiar face in his life, now made different. Was there a trace of the old Eli in the way he squinched up his nose? In the laugh lines around his mouth? Nick could feel his neck getting prickly and hot. Only Eli had ever gotten that kind of reaction out of him. I knew that. I mean, I'd heard that. I'm not on Facebook, but Penny, you remember Penny? From middle school? We're coworkers. She said she'd seen your posts about it. Not that you were some hot topic of gossip or anything. And this was years ago, I think so. Yeah, I know, I was living it. Eli's smile did not abate. Now that Nick knew who he was, he couldn't believe he hadn't realized it before. That smile was as unique as a fingerprint with its little curl downward at the corner. Lopsided. That's how Nick used to think of it back when they were kids. Friends, dating. When they were other people who knew each other by the shape of their smiles. Wow, what's it been? Eli said. Like 2 decades, you look good, man. Thanks, Nick said in an automatic daze. You look, he struggled for something to say. Different. He shook his head. He was messing this up. I'm sorry, I didn't realize who you were, it's just very different. Hey, no sweat. It's actually a big ego boost, you know? Eli leaned over his stuffed cart, using that secret whisper again. I want to look different. That's kind of the goal. Right, exactly. Nick nodded a bit, then lapsed into silence. He was still having a hard time believing that this was really happening, that after all these years he was in a wine store talking to his first girlfriend. No, that seemed disrespectful. Boyfriend, except Nick had never dated boys, except that he had, apparently, retroactively. Eli waved a hand in front of his eyes. You okay there, bud? Nick blinked back to himself. Yeah, like I said, long day. He groped for anything normal to say and focused on Eli's jam-packed cart. You throwing a party? Eli looked down at his selection of wine and booze like he'd forgotten the bottles were there. Oh, no, I mean I'm not, my mom is. I'm just doing a liquor run for her. Right, your parents' Christmas thing? Nick snapped his fingers. My dad mentioned it. Yeah, I saw him. Well, literally saw him, period. I didn't have a chance to say hi or anything. He looked suitably embarrassed. The cat made a break for it, long story, and then I got sent on this mission. He rattled his cart, bottles clinking. Anything for the party people? Sounds like a fun time, Nick offered. Yeah, I guess, if you're a drinker. Eli's nose squinched tellingly. Nick couldn't recall either of them ever drinking much during their teenage years. Never got the taste for it. No, I did. Got too many tastes, actually. Eli's smile went brittle. Had to give it up. Ah, Nick gave a worried glance at the shelves that surrounded them. Bottles of pre-mixed margaritas and piña coladas sat in rows of neon-painted labels. Not exactly the most comfortable place in the world for a person trying to stay sober, he thought. Eli must have noticed his wary look. I can be around it. It's not going to kill me to watch other people drink. It's just kind of boring. A weak laugh left Nick. Yeah, I was going to say. That would be bad, Eli finished for him. They stood in awkward silence for another moment. Nick wondered if now was a good time to say their goodbyes, but Eli spoke before he could broach the tried and tested well. I'll let you go. I heard about your mom, he said, gnawing on his lower lip. I'm really sorry. Nick's breath caught. When his mom had died 6 years ago, before Zoe was even born, most people didn't know what to say. She'd been walking along a newly opened stretch of road that bordered the wildlife preserve, always wanting to get her exercise in. It had been early morning, and a car hit her. The driver kept going. A year or so of stilted condolences, worthless thoughts and prayers, and then no one seemed to mention her. Even Nick's dad didn't go out of his way to talk about her or the accident anymore. The hit and run had been a nightmare, but the ensuing erasure of his mom was the thing that hurt the most. Nick swallowed. Yeah, I thank you for those flowers. Even with the haze of funeral planning, he remembered the wreath of white mums from the Ward family and the accompanying card that contained all their names, including Eli's old one. Least I could do, Eli said. Your mom was such a nice lady. Always had the best snacks. That made Nick feel less heavy. Remember the cake she used to make? Yes, my mom called it air cake because it was so light and fluffy, Eli said with a laugh. Your mom would give us a slice for breakfast on the way to preschool. Fuck, she was awesome. He looked at Nick warmly. I think about her all the time. Hope that's not weird to say. It's not weird, I'm glad. Nick realized that if his mom were there, she'd be chiding him to remember his manners. You must be in town to see your folks for Christmas, right? Eli opened his mouth to respond, but he was cut off by the sudden appearance of a wine barn employee in the requisite orange vest, looking harried. Excuse me, gentlemen, but the store is closing. Oh. Nick looked around and saw that the sprawling warehouse of alcohol was completely empty except for them. He'd forgotten he was working against a ticking clock when he ran into Eli. His shopping cart didn't even have anything in it yet. I should get going, Eli said, pushing his cart carefully around Nick's. It was good seeing you, though. Yeah, good seeing you. Nick turned to watch Eli and his overloaded cart trundle toward the registers, escorted by the beleaguered wine barn employee. Something about the line of Eli's shoulders reminded him of another time Nick had watched him walk away. Without thinking too hard about it, he called out, "We should catch up while you're in town." Eli paused somewhere around the Malbecs, the orange-vested staff member stopping alongside him with a huff. He turned to look over his shoulder, curiosity pinching his face. "Totally," he said. "We should." "I'm running the Thirsty Manatee now," Nick said. "If you ever want to swing by." "Wow, that place is still open?" Eli leaned one elbow on the handle of his shopping cart. "I'm impressed. Waterfront property and all, I was sure some horrible condo developer would have bought it by now." "Nope, we're still there." Nick tried to inject some pride into this statement, but it sounded more weary, like he wasn't talking about the bar and grill anymore. "Still sticking around." "Gentlemen, I really hate to break this up," the wine barn employee said. "Right, see you, Nick." With a wave, Eli departed, shoving his squeaky cart the final dozen yards. Nick watched him for a moment, seeing Eli's mouth moving without hearing what he was saying to the staffer. Probably a self-deprecating apology disguised as a joke if the cashier's half-smile was anything to go by. The more things change, Nick thought, the more they stay the same. It was impossible not to notice that they hadn't actually made any solid plans to meet up. Not that Eli was obligated to. Maybe he thought it was weird for high school exes to hang out. For all Nick knew, it probably was. Yep, Nick thought as he rushed to get all his shopping done before he was thrown out of the store. In all likelihood, he would never see Eli again. Second Chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 3 December 16 Eli saw Nick again the very next day. It wasn't his fault. His parents surprised him by taking him to the Thirsty Manatee for dinner. "You always liked this place." His mom tittered as they made the turn off the causeway, with Eli dreading every moment in the back seat. Maybe he should have mentioned running into Nick at the wine store, explained that going to the Manatee would likely make things awkward. But that would have opened up whole pallets of worms, and Eli didn't really want to get into it with his parents. Maybe they'd get lucky. Maybe it would be so busy, Nick wouldn't even notice him. As they walked toward the entrance, Eli's mom leaned in to stage whisper to him, "How's it feel being back at the old stomping grounds?" Eli shrugged. He wasn't really sure what to say. It felt weird. Everything felt weird. The Thirsty Manatee had always been Eli's pick for dinner if there was something to celebrate, like a straight-A report card or the end of a school year. Once they had their driver's licenses, it was where he and Nick would go after swim practice to chow down on cheesy loaded potato skins and do their homework. It was where they'd gone for their first date after seeing Fellowship at the movie theater, both of them splurging on the surf and turf and making a terrible mess when it came time to crack open the lobsters. It was one of those rare places that was casual enough to hang out if you wanted to, but with a nice enough view of the waterway that it felt like a special occasion. The restaurant itself was low and flat-roofed, surrounded by skinny palms and bushes of bougainvillea. The pink and yellow neon sign with the restaurant's namesake manatee was lit, and as Eli watched, the sea cow's martini glass flickered up to its mouth, then back down, over and over again. He'd always wondered how a manatee was supposed to hold a glass with its flipper. There were new touches, too, for the holidays. Thick garlands of silver tinsel outlined the glass double doors with the standard open sign covered in shiny gift bows. Eli could smell the sharp tang of seaweed, not too bad, but it dug up his memory of how the waterfront stunk during low tide. "Come on." Eli's mom threaded her arm in his and bustled toward the front doors. "I want to make sure we get a good table. It's 6 o'clock. "Exactly," Wendell said. "Dinner rush for this town." They weren't wrong, as it turned out, when they push their way into the restaurant, Eli could see that all the tables and booths inside were occupied, with the outdoor deck beyond packed to the gills. Behind the long wooden bar that lined the far wall, he spotted a bartender with a high pony slinging margaritas onto a serving tray. The gleaming espresso machine must have been a new addition. A group of older teens in St. Stephen County high varsity tracksuits sat in a booth, splitting an order of mozzarella sticks. Everywhere he looked, tables were loaded down with burgers, broiled fillets of mahi-mahi, baskets of crispy conch fritters, and Eli's longtime favorite, the fried grouper sandwich on a Cuban roll. It was nice to know that, even after the soulless national restaurant chains had swooped in to take over the town, the Manatee was still doing a brisk business. The sweet-faced greeter informed them that there was a high top available outside on the patio if they didn't mind the chill. Eli bit his tongue. 70 degrees was chilly here, he reminded himself. As his parents murmured between themselves about whether or not they should wait for an indoor table to open up, Eli scanned the dining room for Nick. He finally spotted him in the farthest booth in the corner, where Nick was bent over what looked like a bunch of paperwork. Eli's parents decided the patio would be fine. If anyone got cold, there was a sweater in the car, Cora pointed out. As the greeter collected some menus, Cora followed Eli's line of sight, landing on Nick as well. Cora squinted. She had glasses but rarely wore them when she wasn't driving. "Honey, am I being racist or is that Nick Wu?" Eli tried not to roll his eyes too hard. Both can be true. Cora ignored the potshot. "We were just talking about him at the party. Shouldn't you go over and say hi? He looks really busy," he improvised. "He probably doesn't need me interrupting." As the words left his mouth, Nick picked up his head and spotted Eli from across the dining room. He smiled, lifted his hand, and made the universal signal for "come on over. Your mom is about to become insufferable because she is, once again, correct." Eli stifled a groan. Eli's mom nudged him toward the back booth. "Looks like he doesn't mind being interrupted at all," she said, insufferably. "Don't be rude, go on." "You can meet us on the patio," Wendell said, already following the greeter toward the door that led outside. Nick was still beckoning. Eli couldn't ignore him unless he wanted to snub him like some period drama villain. He moved toward Nick's booth, awkwardly dodging servers and customers who pushed their chairs back without looking. "Hey, you made it," Nick called to Eli when he was within hearing range. "For a minute there, I thought you were going to blow me off like some New York big shot." Eli hoped his cringe was not too obvious. No, definitely not a big shot. Not even as he approached, a small, dark head peeked around the side of the booth. "Little shot," he mumbled as he stared at the tiny figure sitting across from Nick. It was a kid, wearing a cartoon dog t-shirt and itty-bitty sneakers, feet kicking way above the floor, staring back at Eli with a distinctly unimpressed air. "This is my daughter, Zoe," Nick said. "I'm going to be 5 in February," Zoe said. "Who are you?" "Eli is a friend, honey, an old friend of Daddy's." Nick gathered up his paperwork in a neat stack and pushed it to the side. "We grew up together." "I'm going to be 40 in July," Eli offered. Zoe considered this with a hum. "That's old. You're telling me." "Daddy is going to be 40 in July too," Zoe said. "I know, our birthdays are only 10 days apart. Their moms used to throw them a shared party to save money." "Really?" She seemed pleased. "You're both old." "Sweetheart," Nick said in a put-upon voice. Both Zoe and Eli turned their heads, and it was only after an embarrassing 2 seconds that Eli realized the appellation was not meant for him. That was another lifetime. "Can you please scoot over so Eli can sit down with us?" Zoe groaned and flopped closer to the wall with a dramatic flail of her arms. Eli sat down next to Nick's mini-me, still shocked at the unexpected reveal. A server arrived with a glass of ice water for Eli and a top-off from a pitcher for Nick. Eli picked up the paper-wrapped straw that the server had left without even asking. That never happened in New York these days, grateful for something to fiddle with. "So?" He looked over at Zoe, who was now shredding her paper napkin into little bits, then looked back at Nick. "This is new." Nick's lips parted. "Did I not mention I have a daughter?" He sounded honestly surprised at himself. "I could have sworn I did. I think I would have remembered that." Then, because even to Eli's ears that had sounded bitchy, he added, "Then again, we were being corralled out of the wine barn by a disgruntled employee, so I wasn't exactly listening too closely." "What's disgruntled?" Zoe asked, reaching as best as she could across the table fingertips mere inches away from Nick's red pen. It means grumpy. Nick plucked the pen from atop the pile of papers and handed it over along with his own intact napkin. It sounds like a grumpy word, doesn't it? Yeah, I guess so. Zoe smiled so that her nose scrunched up, then accepted the pen and paper like it was her due. Thank you, Dad, she sing-songed, then uncapped the pen and began doodling on the napkin. It looked like nothing more than a ball of squiggles to Eli's eyes, but what did he know about fine art? You're welcome, sweetie. It was impossible to miss the easy warmth in Nick's eyes. Wow, he was really good with kids. This kid, his kid. Nick was good with his kid. Eli had never pictured him as a dad, let alone a good one. Probably because his most vivid memories of Nick involved making him laugh so hard he lost his lunch in a Taco Bell parking lot. Hard to take someone like that as a serious candidate for fatherhood, but now that the evidence was right in front of him, Eli couldn't deny it. Nick had grown up. Way more than Eli had, apparently. I'm here because someone got sick, Zoe said. Nick caught Eli's confused look and said, Tonight's supposed to be my night off, but the assistant manager called out. Zoe's mom is shopping for, he mouthed the words Christmas gifts, so the munchkin is hanging out here with me. Oh. Eli couldn't help the instinctual glance at Nick's hands, where they rested on the tabletop. No wedding band, but maybe he just didn't like wearing one. But then why say Zoe's mom when you could be saying my wife? Was he overthinking this? He was probably overthinking this. Mom and Dad are divorced, Zoe said, not looking up from her tornado drawings. That means they still love each other, but it's in a different way, so they live in different houses now. But they love me the same because that doesn't ever change. Thank you for that backstory, Eli said. Nick gave him a look that said, Kids, what can you do? She really likes repeating things, unfortunately. He leaned in. So what's new with you? Nothing big. Eli watched as Zoe began stabbing the red pen at her napkin to make a shower of tiny dots around the whorls. When he looked up, he saw that Nick was staring at him with the disbelief that only a cis person could have when told by a post-transition trans guy that there was nothing new in his life. He decided to stick with the basics. I mean, no kids, no. Husband, just me. That got a polite nod of interest from Nick. Eli felt the need to elaborate for some reason. My last serious relationship only went so far as sharing an apartment and a gym membership. Oh, and a very mean cat. The other guy kept it after we broke up. He took a big gulp of his water. And what do you do for work these days? Nick asked. Great change of subject, only marginally more embarrassing than his lack of a love life. Started doing stand-up comedy, got a few writing gigs. Now I'm mostly working in television. Good, solid projects. Eli was glad Nick couldn't see the back of his neck. He tended to go all red and splotchy there when he was forced to bend the truth. Oh, anything I would recognize? Nick asked. No way was Eli going to mention his last real job. Right now I'm helping out a friend who's developing a new show. It's good. It's about a queer commune, like an ensemble thing. If it ever gets made, it's going to kill. That part wasn't a lie, at least. He had been filling the time looking over Margot's stellar pilot script. Wow, exciting. And you helped write it? Eli shifted on the squeaky faux leather of the booth. I mostly punched up some dialogue, came up with some character sketches. Nothing major. Before Nick could ask any more probing questions, he turned it around with an interrogation of his own. And you're the boss of this whole place, huh? Yeah. Nick scratched at the back of his neck. Came home for a bit after college and sort of, he gestured to the kitschy manatee-themed junk that lined the walls. Fell into this. My dad knows the new owner from back when they worked together at the power plant. Heard he needed someone, liked that I was a local kid. He gave that self-deprecating shrug that Eli could pick out of a lineup. I just stuck with it, I guess. Not nearly as impressive as working in TV. Eli blinked. Apparently Nick was having the same reaction over the career question that Eli had had about the family/relationships one. Trust me, he said, it's not that impressive. Nick leaned back in the booth and folded his arms across his chest. So how are your holidays going? Eli was well practiced at hiding winces. He shoved his instinctual reaction down. Oh, you know how it is. Christmas is always kind of a letdown when you're an adult. Nothing can compare to getting your first huffy when you're 7. He took a sip of water. Mom will have the whole family over for dinner, I'm sure. I'm not too up to speed on the details. This is my first time visiting for the holidays in ages, or at all, actually. Wow, really? Nick's eyes widened. I just assumed you, were still close with your family. We are, but they usually come to New York to visit me. Eli leaned back in the booth. Yep, first time in a long time being back in good ol' Neeps. Does anyone still call in PS that? Not since we were young, Nick said. You must be bored, it's not like this place compares to New York. Eli made a face. Now that you mention it, I am going a little stir-crazy. It's only been a day and I'm, like, climbing the walls. He paused. No offense. A smile lingered at the edge of Nick's mouth. He picked up his water glass and huffed a laugh into it before taking a sip. Eli felt a thrill he hadn't experienced in a while, the rush of making Nick laugh. His specific laugh was so satisfying. It felt like slipping into an old sweater that still fit somehow, all warm and cozy. Eli used to go on for hours back when they were teens, goofing off, joking around, anything to make Nick snort. They played off each other so well in those moments. Eli the clown and Nick his straight man. Eli dropped his gaze to the table. Nick was still very much the straight man, he reminded himself. This was not a double act. And frankly, it was weird to even entertain a passing thought that, after all this time, there was anything between them. They shared a past, not a future. I'm bored, Zoe declared. During the adults' conversation, she had turned boneless and was sliding under the table, only her head and shoulders remaining on the lip of the bench seat. Can we go out on the dock, please? Honey, Daddy is still talking with Eli, okay? You can talk with Eli out on the dock, Zoe said with a pout that was sadly underutilized, given that only Eli could see it from where he was sitting. He imagined, as its usual target, Nick would be unaffected anyway. I wouldn't mind getting some fresh air, Eli said. The dining room was pretty loud and crowded. My folks got a table outside, so I need to get out there at some point. Zoe popped back onto her seat. See, Daddy? Eli wouldn't mind. Nick gave Eli a look that probably meant he should have kept his big mouth shut, but Eli wouldn't apologize for teaming up with a fidgeting 4-year-old. He could relate to her restlessness more than he cared to admit. Fine, Nick said in that long-suffering way of his. Let's go. Zoe cheered and clambered over Eli's lap without waiting for him to move, kneeing him in the bladder as she went. Eli stifled a loud woof as all the air was punched out of him. Nick gave him a bland look that said serves you right before following his cannonball of a daughter out onto the back patio. One of the defining traits of the thirsty manatee was its dock, which stuck out into the brown water of the lagoon. Pleasure boaters and fishermen would tie up so they could enjoy a leisurely lunch before heading back out. Tonight the dock was devoid of boats, but it was still a welcoming spot for any restaurant guests who wanted to take in the scenery after their dinner. The sun had already set, a sign of winter, even here where the air was warm and humid, but the rays of gold and pink were still painting a twilight picture of the sky. Night was creeping up in purples and blues oceanward, the first stars winking against the dark. Eli craned his head back to take it all in. You didn't get nights like this in New York. Then again, you did get decent bagels, so it all balanced out. Zoe ran to the end of the dock at full speed, her tiny sneakers pounding against the wooden slats, lights on the heels flashing. Don't lean out too far, please, Nick hollered after her. To Eli, he said in a quieter tone, she likes to look at the fish. Who does? Eli smiled to himself. His eyes tracked along Nick's face. His features had sharpened in places, softened in others, but he was still recognizable as the Nick Wu he'd known. You seem like a good dad, he said, because it was true and apparently needed to be blurted out. Nick blinked rapidly in that way he used to when he was pleasantly surprised. Maybe reserve judgment. You haven't seen one of Zoe's epic meltdowns yet. I'm the worst father in the world when that happens. They meandered along the old dock, hands in their pockets. Zoe was a pink-canned blue dot in the distance. The wind picked up her hair and made it dance around her head. Does it feel weird to you? Eli tipped his chin toward the end of the dock, where Zoe was sitting on the edge with her legs kicking out over the water. Like being a grown-up, having a kid depend on you, being mature. Well, I am pushing 40. Nick gave him an appraising glance. You are too. Yeah, but I'm pushing a queer 40, which is like a straight 26, Eli quipped. I didn't come into my own until 5 years ago, and even then, I still feel like I'm just pretending to know what I'm doing all the time. Oh, I promise you, I feel like I'm faking it pretty much every day. Nick dragged a hand through his thick black hair. All adults are, even us straight ones. I bet our parents were just pretending like they knew what they were doing when we were kids. Really? Eli snorted. That's comforting. He turned to look over his shoulder. His parents were seated at their table with all of their attention on a huge platter of the manatee's iconic pineapple pulled pork nachos. As he watched, his mom fussed with a speck of salsa that had landed on Wendell's shirt collar, swiping at it with her napkin. They were too far away for their conversation to be heard, but Eli could fill in the blanks, Cora complaining about Wendell being a messy eater, Wendell protesting. He loved his folks, he did, but they sure were a certain way. His gaze must have said something that Nick picked up on because he said, "If you're ever feeling trapped at your parents' place, I can give you a ride somewhere, get you out of the house." Eli turned back to him. "Really, you do that?" "Yeah," Nick scratched his ear. "It's not a big deal. I like to go down to the beach in the morning sometimes, get a quick jog in before the day starts." "Jogging? You?" Eli couldn't help but sound incredulous. Back when they were on the high school swim team, their least favorite thing was the coach's once-a-season foray into running laps around campus. What happened to swimming is the only exercise you need. That's still true. Nick bobbed his head. But swimming is a whole thing. You need a pool and at least 2 hours for the changing and the workout and the showering and the drying off. After Zoe was born, a quick run was the best I could do. His lips twisted to one side. Though I haven't made the time lately even for that, if I'm honest. Eli grimaced. "I can't ask you to go out of your way like that." "No, really, you'd be doing me a favor. It'd give me a reason to get back in the habit." Nick stopped in the middle of the dock and turned to face him, so of course Eli had to stop too. "I'm not offering to be polite, okay? I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it." A glimmer of good humor reached his eyes. "I'm not like those posers you hang around with in New York City." They shared a laugh, and Eli ducked his head so his wide smile was directed at his shoes and not his very straight ex-boyfriend. If he didn't know any better, he'd think this might be flirting. It had been a long time since he'd flirted with anyone. "All right," he finally said once the giggle fit past. "I'd really appreciate a ride to the beach. I'll even join you on that jog, if you don't mind me slowing you down." Eli's workout schedule had been sporadic at best lately. He didn't harbor any delusions about his land speed. "I won't mind at all," Nick said. "Pick you up tomorrow at, say, 7 in the morning." Then, because he didn't want to lose his only chance to get out of the house without his parents, he hooked his thumbs into the back pockets of his jeans and feigned a nonchalant stance. "I mean, cool, that works." A subtle smugness worked its way into Nick's smile. "Your folks still live in the house on Pineapple Top?" "Yep, just around the bend." "I live out past Palmetto, near the canal, not far at all." Eli nodded, mentally shaking off the dusty map of his hometown. Palmetto, near the canal. Their bus had gone along that route back in elementary school. A whiplash memory, their assigned bench seat, 5th on the right. Nick at 7 years old, knees scraped up from dodgeball, showing Eli the bruise on his knobby elbow. "It really hurts, but I didn't cry." Eli came back to the present with a slow exhale. In horror, Zoe tripped off the piling and right into Nick's arms. "Wee!" Zoe squealed. Nick set her on her feet. "Please don't climb up there, all right?" he said, but she was already scampering away to examine a bug that was inching along the dock. Nick put his hands on his hips and heaved a sigh, then glanced back at Eli. Eli stood frozen in place with a hand pressed over his mouth in the gayest stance possible. He was pretty sure he'd just had a heart attack, maybe a series of heart attacks. He'd witnessed Nick Wu transform into some kind of super dad with real swooping rescue action. What was I saying? Nick swept a lock of hair off his forehead, calling down the dock to Eli. "Right, bring a bottle of water." The hand fell away from Eli's gaping mouth. "Seriously. You snatched your daughter out of thin air, and all you've got to say is remember to stay hydrated." Nick gave a self-conscious roll of his shoulders, ambling back toward him. "I guess I've developed a sort of sixth sense when Zoe's getting into trouble." He cleared his throat, then gave Zoe another cautious glance. She was still enamored with the beetle. Part of the job. Eli studied Nick's face as he watched his kid play a few yards away. There was worry in that gaze, but also pride and fondness and a bunch of stuff that Eli couldn't even identify. It made his whole face, already handsome, soften into something wonderfully tender. Eli straightened with a jolt. Oh no, Nick hadn't just grown up. He wasn't just a father, he was a hot dad. Competent, nurturing, and hot, and still so painfully straight. "Eli!" Nick's hand waved in front of his face. "You okay?" He snapped back to himself, no more thinking about his former childhood friend or whatever in that context, at least not in public. "Yeah, sorry, I'm fine, totally fine." Nick looked unconvinced and pointed to the restaurant's deck. I was saying, your folks are trying to get your attention. Eli spotted his mom and dad waving at him. Cora pointed at her menu and mouthed time to order. Right, yeah, I should get going, Eli said. And I guess you should get back to work. Nick walked over to where Zoe was crouched on the dock and picked her up like she was a sack of potatoes. Zoe screamed with laughter. So I'll see you tomorrow? Yeah, see you tomorrow. Eli watched Nick head back inside with Zoe squirming under his arm. His shoulders looked so broad under his plain button-down, so capable, and Eli was so thoroughly screwed. Second Chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 4 The back porch was a good enough place to make a private FaceTime call with only the night insects and the dark for company. Eli held his phone out at arm's length, trying to find an angle where the camera wasn't looking up his nose or making him look like death warmed over. It was not an easy task. Margot picked up after a half-second. Where the hell are you? Merry Christmas to you too, he said. Christmas isn't for another 9 days, my beautiful Gentile. What's going on? Margot's concerned face filled the screen. Her henna-dyed hair was arranged on the top of her head in a lopsided bun held in place by a chicken-patterned scrunchie, of all things. She was wearing her signature heavy eyeliner and bright pink lipstick, and her skin was dotted with flecks of sweat. Eli could see a few scattered pieces of weightlifting equipment over her shoulder. Are you at the gym? He asked, because he couldn't pass up an opportunity to crack a joke with his best friend. Only remaining friend, really. Wow, you're already a Californian. Soon you'll be putting flax on everything and telling me how shitty the 405 is. Don't jinx me, Margot barked. LA is already messing with my head. Everyone smiles all the time here. It's like, fuck off, what are you smiling about? The world is ending in 15 years, and we're all going to get cancer. She was on the West Coast to pitch the mockumentary-style comedy that Eli had given her a handful of notes on. It was called Friends of Dorothy, with Margot herself playing the titular Dorothy. The story followed. An ensemble cast of queer people as they attempted to form a commune in rural Washington state. It had all the small-town charm of Schitt's Creek and the bizarre goofiness of What We Do in the Shadows, with the added bonus of characters, handcrafted to be played by some of Margot's favorite queer and trans actors. Eli knew the concept was strong, but he had a hard time believing it would ever get off the ground. The really good stuff never did, in his experience. Maybe the bigwigs were taking her seriously if they'd asked her to come all the way to Hollywood for a meeting, or just feigning progressiveness. It was hard to say. But what the fuck's up with you? She demanded. Eli couldn't help but smile at Margot's familiar brusqueness. She was older than Eli by 10 or 20 years, although Eli had never had the courage to ask for a number. Margot was old school, a force of nature the likes of which most comedians only dreamed of becoming. She could stalk out on stage and have the whole audience eating out of the palm of her hand in 10 seconds flat. As an opening act, she was legendary. As a headliner, she was fierce. And she'd been doing it since the 90s, when lesbian comedians weren't supposed to be out, let alone killing it. Back when Eli had first moved to New York to work the stand-up circuit, she had taken him under her wing. We gals have to stick together, she'd said, which, at the time, had not been inaccurate. Eli had been performing under a different name then, and a different gender, doing jokes about being a woman that never felt. Right in his mouth. But after he came out, Margot hadn't cared. She just stabbed her Virginia Slim into an ashtray and said, "You'll need a new act, huh? So let's start writing." She'd been there through the whole thing, attended his first AA meeting with him, made sure he wasn't skipping his therapy appointments, helped him pick out big boy clothes that actually fit. She was like his fairy godmother and drill sergeant, all rolled into one. Eli sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. Margot knew him too well, well enough that he couldn't keep putting this off. Besides, she was the only friend left standing in his corner. No one else would even reply to his texts. "I'm in Florida," he said. Margot's eyebrows rose high enough to disappear beneath her sweaty bangs. "Why?" she said, like the very notion offended her. "Christmas, family, you know." Eli swept his arm around, using his phone's camera to capture all the strands of lights and tree-shaped cutouts that adorned even the back porch. "But you never go back home, not even for the holidays." Margot frowned on the screen. "You're not giving up or something, are you?" Eli ignored that question. "Hey, have you ever run into an ex and thought, damn, if I had just held on to him for 20 years and if he was at all gay, I'd be sitting pretty?" "Eli," because the wildest thing happened. Ran into my old boyfriend from high school. Well, childhood best friend. Both. He was both. He got hot, Margot. I mean, he was pretty cute back in the day, but it was the 90s, so no one looked great. Baggy clothes and wallet. Chains, bleh. Now he's got this whole top-tier DILF thing going on, and I'm like, maybe? He pulled a face like he was thinking deeply about his prospects, then shook his head. But nah, you've never met a straighter man. Nick's like a ruler in human form. Eli, are you lusting after your painfully unattainable ex-boyfriend instead of confronting the reality of your unemployment? Margot's face was like a hatchet, and her eyes were twice as sharp. He fixed his gaze on the corner of the porch ceiling, where a few spiders were hanging out in messy webs. Looked like they'd caught some gnats or something. Good for them, being productive. Couldn't be me, Eli thought miserably. Ever since he'd lost his job as a story editor on the long-running comedy series Beck's Call, Eli had been struggling to find work. It had come to light that the star of the show, a middle-aged white comedian named Winston Beck, had been strong-arming production assistants into giving him massages to help with his stress. It had apparently been going on for the entirety of the show's run, and probably would have continued forever if one of the women hadn't come forward. She'd been 19 at the time. 19. Eli was still sick to his stomach over the whole thing. In hindsight, Beck's shitty attitude toward the women on staff and his tired jokes about heterosexual sex made a lot more sense. But working alongside the guy over so many years, Eli had never once thought he might be a straight-up abuser. Eli knew better than most just how much bullshit women in their industry had to put up with. He had put up with it, too, before. He transitioned. Now he put up with entirely different bullshit, so he was doubly responsible for not noticing. How could he have missed all those red flags? How could he have allowed this to happen right under his nose? In fact, so many people were demanding to know the answer to those questions that he deleted his social media accounts. There had been some really vivid descriptions about ways Eli should be murdered, too, which weren't technically death threats under the terms of service. So that was fun. Didn't matter now. Beck's Call had been canceled in the middle of filming its 8th season, and Eli was no longer needed to write the jokes that Winston Beck would deliver as his own. Eli and the other comedians in the writer's room were not having much luck landing new gigs. One dude named Jeff managed to snag a spot on a kids' show, but as far as Eli knew, the rest of them were still shit out of luck. Blacklisted to hell and back for even being associated with Beck's monstrous behavior. Eli was all for consequences, and he didn't want to be that guy who whined about getting caught in the line of fire, but he couldn't help but notice there didn't seem to be too many consequences for Beck himself. He was still in the news occasionally, spotted eating dinner with women who were not his wife and generally living large. Like nothing had happened. He swallowed and pursed his lips. Look, I thought you'd get a kick out of this story, but if you'd rather not hear it, I'd rather you tell me what's really going on with you, Margot said. Have you heard back? From the dating show people? Eli had applied to an open position writing copy for a reality show. That was how desperate he was getting. He shook his head. Ghosted, just like all the others. He winced as he prepared to tell Margot something he hadn't told anyone. I sublet my apartment for a month. Figured while I'm down here anyway, no sense in paying the rent myself. Margot's eyes bugged out of her head. You're staying in Florida for a whole month? A whippoorwill started chirping somewhere in the dark brush, loud enough to make Eli jump an inch out of his chair. Did nature have to be so loud, and so late at night? He took a second to calm down before focusing back on Margot. Possibly longer. I haven't made any firm plans, Eli said. He started chewing on the tip of his thumbnail, a nervous habit he used to have as a kid that had only recently resurfaced. What do your folks say about all this? Margot asked. Eli worked his tongue around in his dry mouth, then glanced through the sliding glass doors to see if anyone was listening in, but his parents had gone to bed at 10 and didn't seem to be stirring whatsoever. All the house lights were off and nothing was moving, not even the cat. I haven't told them about it yet. Margot's face collapsed. Dude, I mean, they know about the show getting canceled, but he went back to his thumbnail again, giving it a solid bite before saying, I let them think I found a new gig. So you lied. I declined to correct false theories. Oy vey, on. The tiny phone screen, Margot pinched the bridge of her nose. It's not a big deal. They're thrilled that I'm here. I could stay until Valentine's Day and they wouldn't bat an eye. Besides, he said with a sigh, they think I'm some big-shot funneman who has New York at his feet. I'm the one person in the family who made it. You mean made it out of that shithole town, Margot said with her trademark dryness. Same difference. Eli's shoulders slumped. What kind of loser came crawling back to his hometown like this? It felt like he was right back at square one, like nothing he'd done with his life up to that point meant anything at all. God, Mom would be so disappointed. I can't tell them, not right now, it would ruin Christmas. Right, your most sacred of commercialized holidays. Margot rolled her eyes. Yeah, wouldn't want to sully your celebration of a teen mom. I know, we Goyim have issues, Eli said. At this point, I would take anything. A kid's cartoon, a movie punch-up, hell, I'll even write speeches for the governor of Florida if it'll pay the bills. Isn't he the one who said women can't wear pants anymore because the devil will turn them gay or something? The women, not the pants. The very same. She gave him a concerned half-smile. Well, fingers crossed I sell this pilot, she said, then you'll at least get a writing credit out of it. I barely helped you with the script, Eli said. You don't need to throw me a pity cred. You created like at least 3 of the main characters out of whole cloth. You stayed up late. Helping me break the entire arc of season 1? You're not a pity cred, Margot said. You're practically my co-producer. Eli bit back a sigh. Sure, yeah. He was certain Margot was exaggerating his contributions just to make him feel better. She never let him wallow for long. Margot looked like she was going to keep on him about Dorothy, but thankfully she moved on. Maybe this is a good time for you to take a crack at a new act. Do you have anything cooking? Eli resisted the urge to fling his phone through the screen porch's mesh and into his mom's flower beds. Even before he'd lost his job, Margot had been on his ass about writing new material for himself. Truth be told, he hadn't done any stand-up in an entire year and had no real plans to get back into it. Life had been busy. He thought he was in a good place financially with his writing jobs. And if he was honest, he was starting to think his well had run dry. His stand-up used to be the thing that drove him, the reason he'd taken writing gigs in the first place. Now, Eli wasn't sure he had anything new to say. The thought of getting back on stage made his skin prickle. I've been noodling around with a couple things, he finally said. Lied. When it came to people he didn't want to disappoint, Margot was a close second behind his parents. Well, concentrate on that while you're banished. Oh, and check your email later. I'm going to send you some rewrites for the pilot script. Can you look it over for me? Of course. Eli bobbed his head. He didn't mind giving Margot notes. He owed her way more than that, so it was the least he could do. All right, my whining time is officially over. Tell me all about LA. How many vegans have you seduced since you arrived? Margot lit up, her whole face glowing. 0. Too busy working. Listen, I think the people at the network really like me. I've got another meeting with them on Monday, and then another with the financial team after Christmas. That's serious, right? You don't involve money people unless you're really excited about an idea. That's what Gerald keeps saying. Eli hummed in agreement, although he silently wondered if Margot and her agent, Gerald, were only seeing the best in the situation. The pilot script was really good, but in Eli's experience, it didn't matter how wonderful the concept was or how clear Margot's artistic vision would be. People like Margot, like him, never caught a break. That was just how the business worked. Other comedians, thinner, straighter, less funny comedians, got pilots greenlit all the time. Well, maybe not all the time, but way more than people like Eli and Margot did. There were probably hours-long meetings happening right now over whether or not Margot was too old to play the lead, even though she couldn't be much older than Winston Beck. Just don't get too comfortable out there, Eli said, trying for a light tone. The East Coast can't function without you. Margot blew a raspberry at him. It was her mature poise that he'd always admired. Screw you, Ward. God forbid I actually be positive about something for once. You weren't in the room with them. They were falling over themselves for Dorothy. I just don't want you to be disappointed is all. Margot flipped him off. Get your own shit together before you comment on mine, and tell your parents what's going on with you before they hear it from some dude subletting your place. She moved the phone so close to her face only one flashing eye was visible. And for fuck's sake, don't get sidetracked by some old high school flame. Focus on your future. Great pep talk, coach, Eli muttered. What was that? Margot cupped a hand to her ear. Thank you, Margot Kaufman, for making sure my head stays out of my damn ass, for taking time out of your busy star-fucking schedule to listen to me complain, especially when you've got so much on your plate with this pitch. Her voice rose until it was a high, dog whistle whine. Eli couldn't help but laugh. Even when she was giving him shit, Margot was still one of the funniest people in the world. And she was sticking by him through thick and thin, more thin lately, which he couldn't say about anyone else. Okay. He gave the camera a wave. I love you too. Love you, bye, she said before disconnecting the call. Eli took out his earbuds. Margot was right. Getting all excited over reconnecting with Nick was an exercise in futility. It wasn't like his attraction would ever go anywhere. What was the point of drooling over some straight single dad? Tomorrow, he resolved he would be a normal person, going for a normal jog with another normal person, while they were both being super normal. He went inside to see if there were any more Spritz cookies in the kitchen. Second Chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 5 December 17, Nick kicked off his sandals and left them with the other abandoned shoes at the base of the boardwalk stairs. He dug his toes into the sand, still cool this early in the morning. The 2 bottles of water he'd brought, because of course Eli had forgotten to bring one as instructed, got driven into the sand next to his sandals. Hopefully, they'd still be cold when they returned from their run. He scanned the length of the beach, noting a few pairs of old folks getting in their morning walk before it got too warm out, a couple surfers, fishermen. Gulls swarmed above them, no doubt looking for bait. It was a peaceful scene, no sound except for the birds and the regular whoosh of the waves lapping at the sand. It was also an increasingly unfamiliar one. How long had it been since he'd made time for a morning run? He always felt good afterward, but getting himself out of bed early enough to do it, especially if his insomnia was acting up, was a massive chore. Maybe he'd make a New Year's resolution to get back into doing it daily, or at least 3 times a week. Mondays and Fridays for sure to start. So, Eli said as he sat on a sandy step and unlaced his own sneakers, how far are we thinking? A mile? 2. If Nick tried to jog for even half a mile, he was sure he would collapse. Let's just play it by ear, he said, neatly dancing around the question. Sure. Eli bounced to his now bare feet. He scrubbed a hand through his bedhead as he surveyed the lay of the land. It's nice out here. Yeah. Nick made a visor out of his hand to shield his eyes from the sun, watching a sailboat a few miles offshore. Way nicer than the beach at the other end of the island. You know, the one where all that cocaine washed ashore about 8 years ago. I remember that being in the news, Eli said. It's always something around here, huh? Yeah, we don't go to that beach anymore. He braced his hands on the side of the wooden staircase and started stretching out his calves. Let's get going soon. I need to warm up, it's so chilly. Eli made an attempt to stretch his quads, wobbling a little in the sand. It's 78 degrees. Yeah, Nick switched legs. Like I said, chilly. Right on schedule, Eli's nose wrinkled. He grabbed the hem of his t-shirt. I'm already sweating. I'm going to leave this here. He lifted his shirt over his head, popping back into sight with even more bedhead than before. Even his mustache was rumpled. Nick pretended to be preoccupied with watching 2 older ladies speed walking by with tiny weights in their hands. Seemed like a better place to look than at Eli. He didn't want to stare. He understood on some level that Eli being bare-chested wasn't scandalous now that he was Eli. Not that anyone being bare-chested was scandalous. Was not looking weirder? Eli's voice piped up from behind him. You don't think anyone will steal my extremely stylish AIDS Walk 2015 t-shirt, do you? Nick turned and watched Eli drape the shirt over one of the handrails on the stairs. He was surprised to see no visible scars on Eli's chest. No, wait, there were some faint lines under his pectorals that Nick probably wouldn't have noticed otherwise. He'd been expecting, he wasn't sure what actually. Something more obvious, maybe. I think your shirt is safe. Like the shoes, he said. Cool. Eli pushed a flop of hair out of his eyes, looking up and down the beach. So, which way? They started jogging north. The pace was relaxed for Eli's comfort, and because Nick hadn't exercised in weeks and needed to ease into it, not that he'd ever admit that. For a few minutes, they didn't speak, just breathed in tandem. Side by side, footprints pressing into the wet sand, freezing waves sometimes washing up to their ankles. Still cold? Eli panted as they passed a fisherman. We can move up to the dry sand, if you want. I'm good. It was about 10 times harder to run in the powdery sand above the waterline, and Nick was already struggling. Hey, remember when we'd have swim team practice early in the mornings? When it was so cold out you could see your breath? Eli groaned, Coach would make us jump into the water off the blocks, no easing into it. You would scream. Well, it was torture. Eli rolled his eyes as he smiled, another old habit that had Nick rocketing back into the past. You tried to be so zen. Imagine the Sahara. Pretend. It's 100 degrees out and all you want is cold water. That never fucking worked. I was an annoying little prick, Nick said. He looked out over the water again, scanning for swimmers and finding none. Being on the swim team was great exercise, though. Best shape of my life. Won't ever have abs like that again. Eli cast a glance in his direction, eyes flickering down to where his middle was covered by his worn t-shirt. You didn't exactly let yourself go. Then, before Nick could even register the compliment, Eli faced forward and added, Why don't you get back into it? You live on a peninsula surrounded by water. There's a pool in every other backyard. Can't be too hard to figure out. Maybe someday I can find the time, Nick said. He jogged around a hole in the sand dug by a spirited dog. How about you? He asked, turning it around on Eli instead of explaining how he was too old and busy to do things like swim anymore. You ever get a few laps in at the gym or whatever? Eli made an incredulous noise in between puffs of breath. A pool? In Brooklyn? Forget about it. And anyway, he waited for a particularly strong wave to finish washing over their feet, splashing up toward their knees. I'm not exactly eager to revisit my swim team days. It left me with a lot of hang-ups, you know? Nick whipped his head to the side to stare at Eli's profile. Hang-ups, really? In his memory, Eli had been brimming with self-confidence when they were teens. Nick tried to think of a more respectful phrase but couldn't, downright stunning. Which he almost certainly shouldn't be thinking about. Some of his internal realizations must have shown on his face, because Eli laughed at him. Yeah, can't really hide much in those skimpy suits they put us in. Being on the girls' team while actually being a boy was a real trip. Nick stopped jogging for a second, panting for breath with his hands on his hips. Honestly, he really needed a break. His knee was complaining loudly. But a serious topic like this was a good excuse to stop moving. I had no idea, he said. There was never a conversation about what you were going through. Eli slowed to a stop as well. He looked winded, too, thank God. He placed his folded hands on the top of his head, an old trick they'd done at swim practices to lower their heart rates. I didn't have words for what I was going through. I wouldn't have known what to say. He exhaled, facing the sea like he was looking for something out on the water. I wasn't hiding it from you. I just didn't know. I didn't mean for that to sound accusatory. Nick struggled to find the words. I wish things could have been different, but before he could figure out what to say and how to say it, Eli pointed to some dunes in the distance. Hey, isn't that where we used to make out? Nick blinked. Huh, yeah, I recognize that condo down where the coastline curves. Is this? Eli turned to him with a wicked grin. Wait a minute, this is our beach, isn't it? Nick could feel the heat of embarrassment crawling through his belly. Holy shit, this was their beach. The same beach they visited at night back when there was nowhere else to go for a few hours of kissing. Fuck, had he really brought Eli to the same place where they used to mess around as teens? I honestly forgot, Nick babbled. It wasn't like, I come to this beach to run because it's so much nicer than the other one. The cocaine one. I'm not like reminiscing or whatever. Seriously. Eli gave him a light punch in the arm. I was that unmemorable, huh? Now that Nick was thinking about it, he couldn't believe he'd forgot. The memories were as crisp and clear as if it had all happened yesterday. The way it felt to kiss this person he'd been in love with for years and finally getting to do it as much as they wanted. Overheated skin on skin, sand in awkward places, not caring because it all seemed so important and heightened and necessary. Losing a shoe in the dark of the dunes and driving them home barefoot, holding hands atop the gear shift of his first car. No, Nick said, voice strangled. I remember. Eli's face fell. He dropped his gaze somewhere on the lapping waves. Ignore me, okay? I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable, Nick said, even though it wasn't strictly true. It wasn't that he didn't want to be reminded of the old days, he just wasn't sure he was allowed to think of them. It doesn't make you gay. Eli dragged a hand through his sweaty hair, but it just flopped back into place. The fact that you dated me back then, it really doesn't, just like dating you didn't make me a straight girl. Nick hadn't even thought of that. Now that Eli mentioned it, it seemed like a strange thing not to think of in this situation. No, I know. We were just kids, right? Nothing you do before the age of 30 even matters. The smile was back on his face, but in a brittle way that made Nick sad. It mattered to him. Eli had been his first kiss, his first dance, his first date, his first love. Maybe it was just the holidays making him maudlin, maybe it was just Eli's sudden reappearance in Newport Stephen, but when Nick thought about those firsts now, his stomach swooped all over again. Was it normal to care about those things still? He wondered if Eli would want him to let all those memories go, to forget what they'd been to each other. He didn't want to ask. Then Eli broke into a grin and started jogging backward. Hey, remember when we were here that night? It was clearly about to rain, and you kept saying, "It's going to rain." And I kept saying, "Nah, it's going to pass over us. We'll be fine," because I was so horny and didn't want to stop making out, and then that state trooper showed up with the flashlight, and I had my top off and you had your dick out. You almost got me arrested. Nick laughed to himself, hoping the scandalous story wasn't being carried on the sea breeze to anyone's ears. And then it started fucking pouring, and we all ran to our cars. Eli let Nick catch up to him before facing forward so they were running side by side once more. Good times. My first brush with the law was a good time. His voice went all arch and high at the end. Oh, Nicholas. The old nickname Eli used to tease him with because Nick wasn't short for anything. You haven't changed a bit. Nick couldn't decide whether to take that as an insult or not. I've changed some, he muttered. Eli got quiet then, gazing ahead at the empty stretch of beach ahead of them. I mean, yeah, some. You've got a kid, you're older, we all are. I just meant the stuff that makes you hasn't changed. That piqued Nick's curiosity. Like what? Eli shrugged. I don't know, being hilarious. Getting grumpy about the times you were right. He turned and gave Nick a knowing look. Giving an old friend from way back a ride out to the beach because you can tell how much his family is driving him up the wall. That stuff. An old friend. Nick rolled the phrase over in his mind. It wasn't inaccurate, they'd been friends before they'd been a couple, and for way longer, but still. Something about it felt off, like Eli was giving him an out he hadn't asked for. Well, he said as they jogged, it's nice to see you haven't changed that much either. You're still trying to be funny. Trying? Eli sounded mock-hurt. It's comforting, Nick said pleasantly. Eli rammed his shoulder into Nick's, nearly upending him into the surf. Their laughter echoed as it hit the dunes. When they eventually turned back to the stairs where they'd left their shoes, Nick was struck by the realization that he didn't want their morning together to end. He was having fun. For the first time in a long time, he was enjoying himself. Guilt immediately swamped him. He had fun with Zoe, he really did. She was the best thing in his life. Everything else should be a distant second. Right. This was nice, Eli said as they crossed the last few yards of sand. He sounded sincere, even wistful. I'm glad I came. Nick looked at him, taking in his mustache and freckles at the corners of his eyes, and the way he squinted as he cast his gaze over the now busier beach. He looked so good. Better than Nick had ever known him to be. Almost like the person Nick had grown up with had finally grown into himself. He pushed down the guilt and went with his first impulse. Do you need to go home right away? He asked. Eli turned to him. The wind lifted the hair at the back of his head, making a mess of it. He looked intrigued. No, why? I have plans with Zoe later. This morning, kayaking. Why don't you come with us? It'll keep you out of the house for a few more hours. He could feel his heart rate picking up. Please say yes. Eli's face went through a series of thoughtful scrunches. I wouldn't want to horn in on daddy-daughter time. Even as he said it, Nick could hear that he was just being polite. That riled him up. Here they were, two people who'd grown up together, who knew each other better than anyone else in the world, and they were pretending that etiquette mattered. It would be fine. Seriously. Zoe's been asking 1,000 questions about you ever since you showed up at the restaurant last night. She'd be thrilled to see you again. Eli shook the sand out of his shoes before slipping them back on. You're sure? Absolutely. Nick plucked his shirt off the rail and handed it to him. Then yeah, let's go kayaking. Eli stuck his head through the tee, popping back into view with a smile on his face. This is the most active day I've had in my adult life. Exciting? Nick grinned at his enthusiasm, shaking his sandals out before putting them on. He was about to put a light hand on Eli's back to guide him up the wooden steps, something he'd done 1,000 times when they were younger. But then he realized that it wasn't a normal gesture for two guys, and he dropped his arm with a quickness. He cleared his throat and headed up the steps first, listening to Eli clattering up behind him. Second Chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 6, the river contained a lot less wildlife and a lot more trash than Eli remembered. He stood where the cement boat launch met the murky brown water and watched as a Doritos bag floated by, just missing a flotilla of bobbing soda bottles. What had happened to all those childhood lessons they'd been quizzed on at school? Reduce, reuse, etc. Maybe society really was going to hell in a handbasket. Or maybe the local river had always been kind of trashy, and it was Eli's memory that was faulty. "Excuse me a second." Nick squeezed past him, then stooped to fish the trash out of the water with his bare hands. "Whoa, don't touch that stuff." Eli shrank back, fearing river water splatter. You could get some weird garbage disease. He could see the headline now: Florida man discovers, dies from rare bacterium. Nick looked over his shoulder with the same air as someone who meant to tidy up a house before guests came over, chagrined but determined to fix the misstep. "I'll be fine. There are wet wipes in the car. I've got a 4-year-old, remember?" He held the various pieces of dripping refuse away from himself and walked off toward a trash barrel. Zoe, who had been poking a stick into the dirt in the gravel parking lot, gave up on that and skipped over to Eli. Her shoes had purple flowers on the toes, and the backs lit up in bright fuchsia every time she took a step. "Cool shoes," Eli said. "Thanks." She pushed her hair out of her face and peered up at him expectantly. How were you supposed to make conversation with a little kid? Eli had no experience in this arena. "Did, your dad buy them for you?" Zoe nodded gravely. "Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it was either your mom or your dad, unless you, found them or stole them." Eli winced. "Not that you would steal anything. I'm sure you're a good kid." She stared at him some more, her eyebrows knitting together in bewilderment. Eli started to wonder if this was a good idea after all. He knew basically nothing about children, and it had been ages since he'd been in the great outdoors. This outing would have him dealing with both, possibly for hours. Why had he ever agreed to this? Oh, right. Because he was a loser who couldn't say no when Nick offered to spend more time together. That morning at the beach, it had felt so familiar, whiling the time away with Nick. He could still make Eli laugh better than anyone else in the world, even Margot. Nick had always been a magnet for Eli. When they were kids, all he wanted to do was spend time with him. He could remember inhaling his dinner so he and Nick would have more time to play in the woods before sundown. Nostalgia was a hell of a drug. That was all this was. Memories gone mad, reminiscing gone rampant. "The past gone, or my grandma," Zoe said out of nowhere, breaking Eli from his thoughts. He blinked down at her. "Huh, Grammy K, I have 2 grandmas. Ma is gone, but Dad says she loves me no matter where she is. Grammy K is still here. She could have bought these for me." Oh, right, they were discussing Zoe's footwear. "I didn't think about that." "That's okay." "Grammy is kind of," Zoe looked back at where Nick was scrubbing his hands with a wet wipe. She turned back to Eli and dropped her voice to a whisper. "A pill." Eli's eyes almost bugged out of his skull. "Yeah, it has drama. More of this, please." "She is." Zoe nodded some more. "Mommy says not to say so out loud, though. You won't tell on me, will you?" "I would never." It wasn't a lie. Eli loved to gossip, but he also knew the importance of keeping a secret. "What makes her a pill?" "She hates fun. When she saw these," she marched in place to set off another light show. "She said I looked like I was from the red light district." Eli choked on his own spit. He bent at the waist, trying to catch his breath. You know what a red light district is?" He struggled to say once his pipes were clear. Zoe shrugged. "Some place where they keep lights on all the time, I guess." "Right, that is exactly correct. I don't know why that's such a bad thing, do you?" "Well." Eli thought fast. "I live in a city where they keep the lights on all the time. Some people do like it. They think we're all hoity-toity types." "What's hoity-toity?" "Like when someone is fancy and kind of don't fucking curse in front of the small child. Silly Billy about it." Zoe chewed on her lip in thought as she gave Eli another once-over. "Yeah," she finally said. "Grammy probably would call you hoity-toity." Eli couldn't help it. He threw his head back and laughed. This kid was funnier than most of the professional comedians he had worked with, no contest. "How am I hoity-toity?" "Your hair," she said matter-of-factly. "It's fancy, like too fancy." Eli gasped, his hand flying to the back of his head. "I'll have you know, okay, yes, I did pay way too much for this haircut." His barber was on the Lower East Side and charged about 4 times the going rate, but the staff went out of their way to never misgender him. Eli had been willing to spend the money for that alone. "My mom cuts mine," Zoe said reasonably. Eli examined the careful line of her bangs with a critical eye. It looks good. Do you want her to cut yours? He propped his hands on his hips, delighted with her moxie. How did we get onto this topic? My shoes. Zoe stomped one tiny foot, her heel flashed. Good memory. Nick finally returned, waving his hands like fans through the air to dry them. He lit up just like his kids' shoes. I bought her those, he said with naked pride. Zoe huffed. I already said that, Daddy. You were over by the trash, so you didn't hear. Well, thank you for bringing me up to speed. Nick turned. Eli could see himself reflected in Nick's mirrored sunglasses. Want to give me a hand? Right. They were here to kayak, not banter with a 4-year-old with better comedic timing than most. He helped Nick unlash the bungee cords that held the kayak to the roof of his van, and together they carted it and the oars to the water. It was a 3-person kayak, an artifact from his marriage, Eli guessed, with 2 deep seats molded in blue plastic and a smaller space up front for Zoe. As Nick got her settled, Eli fumbled his way into his own seat, consoling himself with the idea that surely no one looked cool trying to get into or out of a tiny boat. Eli took up the middle position and put his feet in the footwells ahead of him. As he did so, it became clear to him that he would essentially be sitting in the V of Nick's legs, so that was happening. Zoe turned around and waved frantically at him. He waved back weakly. In addition to being in closer quarters with Nick than he'd initially expected, it dawned on Eli that if Zoe tried to lean out of the kayak, he was the closest adult. Mental drills went through his head as he pictured just how fast he'd need to grab the back of her life jacket. Holy shit, how did parents handle this on a daily basis? They hadn't even left the dock, and Eli was already sweating with the responsibility. Okay, Zoe, stay low, Nick said as he stepped smoothly into the kayak. Eli twisted his head around to watch in consternation. Apparently, there was a way to do it like a suave motherfucker, and Nick had perfected it. Annoying. Eli faced forward again and tried to ignore Nick's sandals coming into view as his feet settled on either side of Eli's thighs. He swallowed hard. If his mind would heft itself out of the gutter, that would be ideal. It wasn't like they were squished together or anything. There were several inches of space between them. But it was still hard to ignore the fact that, if Eli leaned back just a little, his head would be resting against Nick's chest. Nick tapped Eli on the shoulder, making him almost jump out of his skin. Ready to get going. Why? Eli cleared his throat. Yep. He took the dual lightsaber-style paddle that Nick handed to him. Zoe, you ready to be our lookout up there? He said. Zoe turned around and gave him a very serious salute. Dear Lord, this kid was the funniest person on the planet. Eli saluted her back. Nick gave a gentle push with his own oar on the side of the dock, and off they went. It took Eli a few minutes of Nick's patient coaching to understand paddling in tandem, but he soon got the hang of it. He just hoped his arms held out. His lats were already burning. Not to mention the heat of Nick's legs snug against his hips was driving him to distraction. The river was a brackish vein that snaked its way through black mud, lined with tangles of mangroves and bunched clusters of cabbage palms. Here and there a scraggly pine or a stately cypress poked out from the tree line. The huge blue of the sky and its puffy white clouds were reflected almost perfectly in the river water, disrupted only by the occasional flop of a fish or skim of a white egret. They paddled along quietly, the silence thickening as they got farther away from the park and the traffic on the bridge. Zoe twisted around to face Eli. Have you ever seen an alligator? Sure, tons. It was hard not to when they got into every canal, lake, and deepish ditch. Have you ever seen one eat someone? No. Eli twisted around to give Nick a look. He hoped. Nick could interpret the what the fuck raise of his brows. Nick rolled his eyes. Zoe wanted to swim in the river last year, so we had to explain to her why that's dangerous. She's been kind of obsessed with the idea ever since. Eli stared straight ahead and paddled faster. Hey, speaking of deadly local wildlife, remember when we were taught to do the stingray shuffle? He said in a loud voice. Anything to get them off the topic of alligator attacks. I know about the stingray shuffle. Zoe turned almost completely around, abandoning her post as lookout. I learned it at the nature center. Keep your feet on the sand, she recited, and rays will swim away as planned. She shuffled her shoes against the bottom of the kayak. Eli shot Zoe a smile. Your dad and I would get yelled at when we ran through the shallows with our knees up. Man, we got in so much trouble at summer camp. Zoe's mouth fell open. Daddy got in trouble? Only because Eli tossed hermit crabs in my hair, Nick muttered. Eli laughed at the memory. The camp counselors ended up dividing our group into boys and girls just to keep us from horsing around. Zoe's face scrunched. But you're both boys. Eli nearly lost his grip on his paddle. He rowed faster to cover it, mind racing. How was he supposed to explain so a little kid would understand? He turned around to face Nick. Do you want to take this one? Nick spoke to Zoe over Eli's head, his steady, smooth voice filling the quiet of the river. When we were younger, people thought Eli was a girl. When he got older, he realized he's actually a boy. We call that being transgender. It's a medical condition, like grandma's diabetes. Some transgender people need medicine to manage it, just like Grammy does. Makes sense? Zoe sounded bored or maybe just unimpressed. Can I have a fruit snack? Eli turned around to boggle at Nick, who just gave him a what? Shrug of his shoulders, like he didn't know how amazing he was. An age-appropriate discussion of gender and fruit snacks. Was Nick even real? Yes, you can have a fruit snack. Nick produced a tiny purple packet from his pocket like a magician and handed it to her over Eli's shoulder. Zoe ripped open her packet and chewed on a brightly colored cherry. Will any of my friends be transgender when they get older? She asked. They could, it's pretty rare, but it happens. Nick paddled along placidly. Eli faced forward and got back to work too. If it does, your mom and I will help you learn any new names they pick out. Zoe stared open-mouthed at Eli. You got to pick a new name? Then, not waiting for the answer, she pummeled him with follow-up questions. Did you know right away which one to pick? Why'd you pick Eli? Is it short for something? Yes, actually, he said, deciding to focus on the last question. It's short for Elijah. My best friend Margot, she just calls me E. He could feel Nick perk up behind him. Wait, seriously, Elijah? An edge of amusement was already in his voice. He must have made the connection. You gigantic nerd. Eli closed his eyes with a sigh. Look, early aughts Elijah Wood was trans mask culture. When Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring came out, it was the first time a short dude with great lashes got to be the hero in something, okay? He'd been more than obsessed with the film back in the day, for reasons which only became clear later in life. You named yourself after a hobbit, Nick crowed. His oar faltered in the water, apparently because he couldn't handle it while laughing his ass off. Oh my God, that's perfect. I would name myself after Sky if I wanted to change my name. She's my favorite Paw Patrol, Zoe said, but I like Zoe for now. Then, ooh, a bird, she thrust her finger in the direction of a gray and white osprey in flight with a wriggling fish in its talons. It's got something? Whoa, pretty cool. Nick started talking all about birds of prey and how they caught fish, and Zoe asked a million questions, and Eli sat motionless with his oar resting across his lap in a daze. He wasn't sure whether he was about to laugh or cry. Were there seriously parents like Nick out in the world, telling their kids that being trans was fine? That was so bizarre. Not that he expected Nick to be a jerk about it, but he also hadn't expected him to be absolutely perfect. He just explained things calmly in a way Zoe would understand. Eli couldn't help but think of his own coming out 5 years ago when he'd taken his parents to Central Park, sat them down on a bench near the bandshell, and told them he was going to start going by Eli, that he'd been taking tea for months. His mom had sat in stunned silence, and his dad had picked up his hand and said, "We'll love you no matter what." Perfect, 10 out of 10, no notes, really should have stopped there, but then Eli Ward had cleared his throat and added, "After all, you'll always be our daughter." Fumbled it right on the 10-yard line. Eli's therapist had lived off that moment for about a year and a half, all told. His parents were better about that stuff these days, but woof. He watched Zoe squeal with delight as some tiny green fish flashed by under the surface of the water. She was only 4. Would she even remember what her dad had just said? Before coming out, Eli had scoured his own memories for any clues as to how his parents felt about trans people and could find hardly anything. It just wasn't a topic they'd ever discussed. It was at most a joke. It was sitting in a theater, with his parents watching Ace Ventura and hearing everyone, himself included, act grossed out when the villain was revealed to be a trans woman. Yeah, it was a different time, but what a shitty time to be in a body that didn't fit. Eli would have given his left arm to have heard his parents say 1/10 of what Nick had, not that he blamed his parents. Like Eli himself, they hadn't had the words for it. Then Zoe stood up, rocking the kayak as she pointed frantically at something in the water up ahead. Look, look! Eli fumbled to grab her, though he had no idea what the best course of action was when a 4-year-old was seconds away from going headfirst into the water. He ended up catching her by the back of her kitty life vest and gently tugging her back down. Zoe just gave him a confused look. Sorry, he looked back at Nick for confirmation that he'd done the right thing. Was that an overreaction? I didn't want you to fall in. Zoe huffed. I wasn't going to. Zoe, Nick said with endless patience, I told you to stay low, right? Good job, Eli. Now let's keep our voices down, too, or else you might startle them. Eli was so preoccupied with his mini heart attack that he hadn't even noticed what Zoe was so excited about. He craned his neck and looked where she had been pointing. Up ahead in the tea-colored water, a few gray lumps floated peacefully. One lump rose above the surface, a bristly snout revealing itself to take a puff of air. Whoa! Eli reminded himself not to stand and rock the boat like Zoe had just done. Manatees. A whole herd of them. Nick stopped paddling and laid his oar across his lap. Eli followed suit so they could drift alongside the group of sea cows at a safe distance. Eli couldn't remember the last time he'd seen a manatee in person. The elementary school he and Nick had attended used to take field trips to the local power plant, where the highlight of the otherwise boring tour was a trip down to the water, where the warm reactor runoff was pumped into the estuary. The manatees, truly nature's connoisseurs of coziness, would gather in droves to enjoy the bathtub effect. As a kid, Eli had worried they'd get radiation and turn into monsters, but 7-year-old Nick had assured him that a manatee with superpowers would do nothing dangerous. They'd just be super lazy, he'd said, which made perfect sense to Eli. Zoe counted the gigantic bodies floating off their left side. 1, 2, there's 3. And Eli, look, there's a baby. She pointed emphatically, and Eli made a bar with his arm along the edge of the kayak, just in case she forgot the rule about staying seated. Where? Eli peered into the water until a small, fat shape came into view beside one of the huge ones. Oh, I see it, he whisper-screamed. It's so cute, Zoe said in the same hushed squeal. Okay, maybe all the heart attacks were worth it if having a kid meant you got to feel a sense of childish delight in something as wholesome as spotting an endangered species in its natural habitat. The baby manatee looked like a puffy gray marshmallow. It stuck its nose into the air and blew a light mist. Zoe was beside herself, and Eli was right there along with her. That one's me, Eli said, pointing to a sea cow who looked like he'd nodded off in the shallows. He bumped into a bundle of mangrove roots and just kept floating. I'm the baby, Zoe said, like it was obvious. She pointed to the biggest one at the head of the pack. And that one's Daddy. Her grin was wide enough to split her face. Nick's laugh was smooth as honey. It sure is, sweetheart. Eli watched all their manatee counterparts floating around like one big happy family, trying to concentrate on the wonders of nature, and not on whatever inappropriate non-feelings he was totally not experiencing. Chapter 7, Nick helped Zoe out of the back seat and onto the hot black pavement of the Checkers parking lot. Lori was already there, waving at them from a table underneath a hard plastic umbrella. The smell of thick grease hung in the air. This particular Checkers on Route 1 had served as their traditional rendezvous point for the last year. It had been Lori's idea. We want Zoe to associate handoffs with good things, like French fries and milkshakes. Isn't that the plaza where the old Blockbuster was swallowed up by a sinkhole back in '98? Nick had asked. He had associations, too. We don't have to tell her that part, okay? Nick kept an eye on the remnants of the sinkhole a few hundred yards away. The gash in the earth was filled in with sand and tall grass now, but he still didn't trust it. If it were up to him, they would meet at the Wendy's up by the county line, closer to the thirsty manatee, but that would be more driving for Lori. The compromise meant Nick would have to go straight to work from lunch to get ready for dinner service, but who needed little things like showers. He kept a stack of clean polos in the back office. It was fine. Zoe ran to her mother, the black curtain of her hair swishing as she went. Nick followed more sedately with his hands in his pockets. Even at a distance, he could hear his daughter's chatter over the traffic at the nearby intersection. And he lives in New York City, where the lights never go out, but he grew up here with Daddy and he's really funny. Do you want to hear the joke he taught me? Okay, so, how did no wait, where was the cow? Wait, I said it wrong. Zoe blew a giant raspberry. Right as Nick reached the table. Why did the cow get an award? I don't know why. Lori smiled gently, her green eyes shining as she watched Zoe's antics. She tipped her head back and mouthed a hello at Nick. She got an award because she was outstanding in her field. Get it? Outstanding. Zoe jumped in place for emphasis. Nick had already heard this joke twice, once when Eli said it in the car on the way to drop him off, and again when Zoe wanted to practice it. Still, he laughed. It was a good joke. That's pretty funny, Lori offered, though she only smiled a tiny bit wider. There was a crackle of tension at the corners of her mouth, like it was a strain to keep up the cheery demeanor for Zoe's benefit. Nick recognized the sign as clear as day. It was one that had heralded their divorce, after all. It didn't hurt as much now when he thought about the breakup with Lori. Over a year's worth of distance made it feel less like a failure and more like a fact. He held no ill will toward Lori herself. She'd been right when she'd told him, "I don't think this is working." Now, when he looked at her and saw her struggling with something, he felt a tinge of his former love for her, but mostly he felt camaraderie. They were a team, and he took that responsibility very seriously. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, tugging playfully at Zoe's hair, "your mom and I are going to order lunch. Why don't you stay here and make sure no one steals our table?" The walk-up window was only a couple feet away. He could keep an eye on her and still have a semi-private conversation with Lori. "Can I get a Nana shake?" Zoe asked, already scrambling up on the plastic seat and glaring at an older couple that dared pass within a yard of the table. She took her responsibilities very seriously, too. "As long as you let me have one sip," Nick said. They pinky swore on it. Lori shot him a grateful look and joined him in the line for the order window. They stood quietly for a few minutes, studying the garish menu and listening to the teenagers at the front of the line arguing with the Checkers employee about the price of fries. "You doing okay?" Nick finally asked. "Yeah, fine." Lori dragged both hands through her long brown hair the way she always did when things were not fine. "Mom might join us in a bit." Nick pursed his lips. His ex-mother-in-law Kay was not his biggest fan, and the feeling was mutual. His marriage had been challenging enough without Lori's mother hovering in the background, making snide comments and judging every single one of their decisions. Nothing Nick did was ever good enough for Grammy Kay, from the shirts that he wore, knockoffs are they, to his job at the restaurant, waste of a college education, in my book. Even Zoe's name had nearly set off World War III. Kay had found it too exotic. "Isn't she going to deal with enough?" she'd said when Lori was 8 months pregnant. Being mixed origin, I mean. Like Zoe was a bag of coffee beans. Nick would never actually punch an old woman, but that day, he'd come really close. So no, eating Checkers with his ex-wife's mother was not on Nick's list of preferred activities, but the woman was family, so Nick had to grit his teeth and get through it. "Should I get her a burger?" he asked, striving to be more pleasant than Kay herself would ever be to him. "If you do, she'll say she wanted the chicken. If you get the chicken, she'll say she wanted a burger. If you don't get her anything, she'll complain that we didn't think of her. There's no winning here, so don't bother wasting $6. Let her order her own lunch." Nick tried to hide his surprise, but he knew his eyebrows were probably rising over the tops of his sunglasses. That's pretty pragmatic. It was more diplomatic than asking her why she was suddenly standing up for herself in some small way instead of bowing to Kay's domineering personality. Lori from 5 years ago would have texted her mother asking for her order and would have waited for a reply that never came. "Therapy," Lori sing-songed. She whipped out her own sunglasses from her purse and settled them on her button nose. "It's a trip. You should try it." It was delivered like a joke, but Nick didn't laugh. They'd tried couples counseling before the divorce, but Nick hadn't gotten much out of it. Their counselor had been about 1 billion years old and had some old-fashioned views on how a marriage was supposed to work. His only redeeming quality was he took their insurance. Recently, though, Lori had found a better therapist for herself. So the new doctor is working out. Even if he personally didn't put much stock in therapy, he wanted to at least try to be supportive. "It's exhausting, I guess, hashing out all this stuff, but yeah, I think it's good." They finally made it to the front of the line, and Lori began rattling off her order along with Zoe's and Nick's. While they waited for the food, she turned back to him and said, "But enough about me. Who's this new best friend Zoe can't stop talking about?" "Eli, I think," she said. She glanced back to check on her. "Yeah, we went to high school together. He's in town for Christmas." Normally, he would be honest and upfront with her about the whole story, but that would mean explaining that Eli was transgender. That seemed rude without his express permission. Lori examined him impassively from behind her Ray-Bans. I don't think you've ever mentioned him. Have you two stayed in touch since high school or? Nick looked over to where Zoe was still sitting at the table, humming to herself. No, we ran into each other the other day. Pure coincidence. Huh. Lori gazed thoughtfully into the middle distance in the direction of the Applebee's parking lot. Well, I'm relieved you found someone to hang out with. Surprised, but relieved. Nick eyed her, not taking his gaze away even as the Checkers employee handed him their tray of food through the window. What's that supposed to mean? It means exactly that, Lori said. She took the molded paper tray of drinks. The closest friendship you have these days is with your dad. And don't say the restaurant's appliance repair guy counts. Just because you see him twice a month doesn't mean you're friends. Nick couldn't even argue with her, but he did roll his eyes at the old chestnut. Ever since Wu Tianyi, or Agong as Zoe called him, had retired a few years back, Nick had felt responsible for his dad's well-being. Nick's only other friendships were ones from college, and time plus distance had made it difficult to keep up with the old group from the U of M Asian Society. Ken was out in San Francisco now. Wilma was doing high-powered government work. The Lee twins were globetrotting. Nick's own life wasn't half as exciting, and he wasn't sure if he had anything left in common with them. They had a group chat to keep each other updated on major life events, but he hadn't checked it in ages. Sorry to make you worry about my lack of a social schedule, was his only rejoinder. I'm being serious, Lori said as they made their way back to the table, where Zoe was bouncing with excitement for her incoming milkshake. You need to take stock of your priorities. I have priorities, Nick protested. Making time for yourself should be one of them, Lori said. Spoken like a true recipient of therapy, Nick supposed. Maybe if you cut back your hours at the restaurant, you would have more time for your own life and Zoe. Nick resisted the urge to groan. It was an old argument between them, predating the divorce. Yes, he worked long hours, but he really didn't have a choice financially, especially now that he relied on his single income. I'm doing my best, all right. I even have some time off scheduled soon. Yeah, only because I got on your case about it, Lori said. I swear to God, Nick, I'm like an inch away from nominating you for Queer Eye. Nick was saved from responding to that by the pristine white SUV that pulled into the lot at that exact moment. It slotted itself directly atop the dividing line of two parking spots. Eric Clapton blared from the stereo. Kay had arrived. Her tiny figure descended from the driver's seat, clad in head-to-toe Christmas clothing. A thick sweater with real metal jingle bells sewn along the tips of appliqued tree branches. Her leggings had reindeer printed all over them. Even her socks had little snowflakes. Nick would have found this overblown display of holiday cheer charming on literally anyone else, but seeing Kay decked out like that rubbed him the wrong way. How could someone so miserly, with their affections, be so devoted to the season of giving? Hello, all, Kay said as she whipped off her sunglasses. You didn't order for me, did you? You really shouldn't put yourself out like that. She was clearly expecting an answer in the affirmative, already gearing up for a gleeful refusal of the item that had been bought with her in mind. Oh, we didn't get you anything, Mom, Lori said as she doled out the food on the table. I wasn't sure what you'd be in the mood for. Want to grab something for yourself? Kay clearly needed a moment to absorb this development, blinking in the sun. No, that's all right, she said, readjusting her purse strap. I probably shouldn't indulge in fast food anyway. She turned to Zoe, who was happily munching on her fries. It makes you very fat, you know. Mom, Lori said in that tired way she had. She'd been combating her mother's fat phobia without much success for years, Nick knew. At this point, he didn't hold out much hope for her to change. All bodies are good bodies, Zoe chirped. At least someone was absorbing Lori's lessons. Nick snuck his promised sip of her milkshake, giving her a wink. How are you, Kay? He said as he handed the cup back, hoping to steer the conversation in another direction. One that wouldn't give his daughter body image issues for life. She heaved a sigh and dropped to the bench next to Zoe. Aches and pains, pains and aches, I'm really getting too old. She turned to Zoe and said, And what did you and your father do today, sweet pea? She snuck a couple of Zoe's fries out of their wrapper. No one pointed out the hypocrisy. Zoe swallowed her mouthful of milkshake. She'd been scolded about talking with her mouth full by Kay last week. We went kayaking with Eli. We saw manatees. They were really cute. Kay didn't seem impressed with their manatee sighting. Instead, she asked Lori, "Who is Eli?" Lori set her jaw in a way that Nick knew meant I wasn't even there. Mom, before saying in an even tone, "An old friend of Nick's who's back in town for the holidays. He makes people laugh as a job, and he said my shoes were cool, and he sat in the middle so I could be lookout, and he got to pick his name because he's transgender," Zoe said, digging her fries through the creamy surface of her milkshake like Nick had taught her. Then we ate fruit snacks. A couple things happened in swift succession. Lori's eyes went wide, visible even behind her Ray-Bans. Kay's mouth fell open to emit a sound like a slowly deflating tire. A few yards away, in a completely unrelated incident, a kid dropped a bag of French fries all over the pavement and started to wail. Loudly. Nick felt like joining in, but for Zoe's sake kept it together. "Okay." He put his burger down on its wrapper. "So Zoe, I should have explained this earlier, but it's not nice to tell people that someone's transgender without their permission. It's really personal. I only told you when we were kayaking because Eli said I could. Okay?" Zoe, thank everything good and pure, kept on eating her fries, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Okay," she said. "That's what you're concerned about, personal privacy?" Kay rounded on Lori. "Did you know about this?" "Nick doesn't need my permission to see a friend, Mom," Lori said. Her voice shook, but she got the words out. "They just went kayaking. And you call yourself a mother?" Kay screeched. Lori dropped her gaze back to her chicken sandwich. Nick could practically see her curling into herself like she always did when her mom was on a tear. "A real mother would be a hell of a lot more vigilant, I can tell you that." "Whoa." Nick held up both hands. He witnessed Grammy Kay berate Lori many times, but even for her, this was extreme. "You don't get to talk to her like that, Catherine." He tried to keep the snap out of his voice, but he wasn't totally successful. Zoe looked up from her fries, chewing slowly, her gaze bouncing between all the adults at the table. Her brow crumpled in what might have been concern or even fear. Nick's heart broke. Kay turned on him with her nose in the air. "It's none of your business how I talk to my own child." Nick very much disagreed, but before he could say so, Lori stood and said, "That's it, I'm taking Zoe home now." "We're still doing the mall Santa thing on Wednesday, right, Nick?" Nick stared up at her, then remembered the family photo shoot she had arranged with all of them, Kay and his dad included. Lori had been weirdly insistent on them all being there together. "Yeah, I'll see you there." He hoped her therapist gave her a gold star during her next session. She was really self-advocating today. "Great." She shrugged her purse strap over her shoulder and looked down at Kay, whose mouth was hanging open. Her gaze skipped right over her to Zoe, whom she gave a big smile. "Come on, kiddo, say goodbye, you can finish your shake in the car." "But I just got here," Kay said. "And we're just leaving," Lori replied. "We'll see you at the mall in a couple days, Mom. Hopefully you'll have calmed down by then." Zoe flung herself at Nick, her little arms going around his neck. "Bye." Nick squeezed her tight, then let go. "Love you, sweetheart." He'd talk to her on the phone tonight before bed, their special wind-down ritual. Maybe then he'd have a chance to explain how none of Kay's outbursts were her fault. "Give me a hug goodbye, too, Zoe." Kay opened her arms imperiously. She looked like some dictator presiding over the checkers table. Zoe looked at her, then zoomed toward Lori's car at a fast clip. Lori cleared her throat. "I've told Zoe she doesn't have to hug anyone she doesn't want to. It's important that she learns that." Kay sputtered. "WL, I've never heard of anything so ridiculous. I'm her grandmother, not some stranger." She whirled on Nick. "Did you let her hug that transgender?" Apparently, she thought the word was a noun, which was bizarre. Nick stood as well, slipping on his sunglasses and following Lori's lead. If Kay wanted to act foolish, she was going to be foolishly alone. "Let me get this trash out of your way, Lore." He hefted their lunch trays, congratulating himself on not staring down Kay as he did so. Being an adult, and not a petty one, was really difficult sometimes. Nick wasn't worried about Eli having a negative impact on Zoe, but he was worried about his ex-mother-in-law. It didn't seem fair that no one questioned her presence in her granddaughter's life. Just because someone was family, did they need to be given so much leeway? "Moo-um." The sound of Zoe trying the car door handle over and over rang out across the cement. "Let me in." Lori swept past Kay. "Coming, sweetie." "I won't be ignored," Kay called after her. Lori didn't even turn around, so Kay scowled in Nick's direction instead. "I won't." There was nothing Nick could say that would be more satisfying than simply walking away and leaving that sad woman alone in the Checkers parking lot. So that was exactly what he did. Chapter 8, December 18, Christmas tree trimming was a big deal at the Ward house. There was already a tree set up in the sitting room, of course. That had been necessary for the party. But that tree, according to Eli's mom, was the aesthetic one, artificial, tastefully decorated in shades of red and gold. It had been moved to the dining room to make space for the real tree. The family tree. The bonkers-as-shit mess of a tree. Cora insisted on getting a live tree for this purpose, even though Sweet Potato would probably chew on the pine needles and puke them up. This tree was destined to be covered with a mishmash of ornaments, most of which had been hoarded in the attic since Eli was a baby. Eli struggled to get the sawed-off base of the trunk into the tree stand, his nose mashed into the scratchy needles. He was inhaling nothing but that fresh pine smell, and personally, he did not care for it. But as long as Mom was happy, he told himself that was all that mattered. He was a good son, ostensibly with plenty of upper body strength. Eli's father stood between the armchairs in the sitting room and tried to direct Eli in arranging the tree. A little more to the right. No, my right. His mom, meanwhile, sat on the satiny sofa and had a different vantage point altogether. I think a little more to the left, actually, dear. No, definitely right. Which way am I going? Eli half screamed into the pine boughs. A beat of hesitation, then Wendell said, to the left. There, hold it right there. Cora cried, even though in Eli's estimation, the tree was in the exact same spot it had been for the past 10 minutes. That's perfect. Eli stooped and tightened the screws in the base as fast as he could. He could hear his dad opening the old pickle bucket that had served as their Christmas ornament repository ever since Eli could remember. The lid crackled as it was peeled off. Eli finished securing the tree and turned to find his parents bent over the bucket of shiny baubles. This is the first time we've been able to do this as a family in ages, his mom said. She picked up one of the ornaments from the top of the pile, holding it up to the light. It was a cheesy plastic snowflake-shaped picture frame, and smack dab in the center of it was Eli's baby picture. He was wearing a pink velvet dress with his hair done in 2 pigtails that shot up from the top of his head. "Ah, look how cute you were," his dad said. A familiar feeling of disappointment wove its way through Eli's stomach. It wasn't like he hated the picture itself, which was a bit embarrassing but not soul-searingly terrible. It was the fact that his parents were cooing over it, tapping their fingertips against the plastic casing like they wanted to touch the baby's chubby cheeks, treating it like it was real. When Eli looked at that photo of himself as a baby, or one of the million other childhood photos his mom proudly displayed around the house, he didn't see himself at all. It was like he was looking at a picture that had come with the frame from the store. That kid was a stranger. He felt no connection whatsoever. Obviously, it was different for his parents. "Do you want to hang this one?" His mother held out the snowflake. "Yeah, you should have first dibs," his father chimed in. "You are the guest of honor, after all." "I'm not a guest, I'm your son," Eli mumbled, but he took the ornament and hung it on some random branch to get it over with. They soon fell into a rhythm of tree decoration. Wendell managed to unknot the strands of lights reserved specifically for the tree. Cora dug through the ancient ornaments, choosing each new addition with all the care in the world, even though they were mostly crumbling bits of macaroni that Eli had made in elementary school, his old name scrawled on the backs. Eli took each ornament she handed to him and applied it to the tree as quickly as possible. The faster they decorated, the sooner he could fling himself atop his childhood bed and stare at the text messages he'd received earlier that morning. The words were already ingrained in his head. 10:33 a.m., I had a really nice time at the beach with you yesterday. 10:34 a.m., and kayaking. That was also nice. 10:38 a.m., this is Nick, by the way. You gave me your number. 10:47 a.m., I guess I didn't need to tell you who this is. It's not like you went kayaking with more than one family yesterday. A rare quadruple text. Of course, Nick would be the type to blow up his phone. Eli was sure that if they'd had cell phones back when they were teens, Nick would have been texting him nonstop. As it was, their moms had to restrict their landline usage since they both lived in fear that there would be an emergency and the line would be busy. God, he was old. old enough to remember lying on his stomach across his bed, feet kicking in the air while he played with the curly phone cord. What had they even talked about? Whatever it had been, Nick had laughed a lot. That, he remembered. He'd sent Margot a screenshot of Nick's texts along with a voice note that said, "What time is it right now on the West Coast? Because here it's DILF o'clock." Margot had replied with a series of middle finger emojis and one single eggplant. He grinned at the memory as he hung yet another tatty handmade ornament, this one an inoffensive reindeer made from a clothespin. "Oh, I like that one," his mom said, breaking into his thoughts. "You were such an artistic child." "Yeah," Eli agreed far too readily. "Thanks, very talented at reindeer." He went back to quietly putting ornaments on the tree. Maybe try to space them out a little nicer. His mom plucked a shiny orb that had lost almost all its red paint and moved it a foot down and to the right. "You're clumping them all up, Eli. He's just out of practice." His dad's booming laugh echoed through the sitting room. "I bet it's been a while since you've put up Christmas decorations, huh, kiddo?" It was true. Eli rarely put up a string of lights on his fire escape, let alone tried to fit a tree in his tiny apartment. His Christmases in New York were nothing special. He usually treated it like any other day, got some work done, watched some TV, ordered Chinese food with Margot if she was free. His parents had expressed sorrow at what they considered his lonely and sad holidays, but Eli didn't mind a quiet Christmas. In fact, he could really use one right about now. "All the more reason to focus on doing a good job today," Cora said primly. "Who knows when we'll get another chance to be together for the holidays like this." And there it was, the patented Ward passive aggression. Eli had known it would rear its head eventually, but he'd hoped to dodge it for at least a few more days. He tried to make a joke out of it, like he usually did. "Maybe next year we can all get together in Aspen," he said in a fakey posh accent, all lifestyles of the rich and famous. Turning to the sofa, he picked up the Afghan his mom had crocheted years ago and draped it around his neck. "The slopes are just to die for, darling, and that powder." He gave a cocaine-esque sniff and then fox whispered behind his hand. "The snow isn't too bad either." Wendell laughed, but Cora's mouth thinned into a tight line. Tough crowd. "I'm sorry you think it's silly to want to be together at the most wonderful time of the year," she said, ducking down to inspect the pickle bucket of ornaments again. Eli unwrapped the Afghan from his neck with a swallow, but before he could apologize, his dad swooped in. "He's not saying it's silly, he's just goofing around. That's his job, he's a professional goofer." Guilt formed a heavy stone in Eli's chest. That was his job, past tense. Probably not the best time to update his parents on the latest, though. "Well, I think," Cora said, rummaging through the bucket with more force than necessary, "that our time together is precious. It would have been nice, for example, to see you at all yesterday, Eli. But you spent all morning and most of the afternoon out with Nick Wu, and by the time you got home, all you wanted to do was nap for hours." Eli spread his arms wide like he wanted to show he wasn't hiding anything, which was a lie, but one he was committed to. "Mom, I went for a run and then kayaked down the river. That was more exercise than I'd gotten in, like, years. Of course I needed a nap." "I always liked that Nick Wu," Wendell said to no one in particular as he tested bulbs along a strand of lights, trying to find the one that was causing a dead patch. "When we were visiting you in New York," Eli's mom said, "I wouldn't sleep a wink, certainly wouldn't nap. I wanted to spend as much time with you as possible." That was true. Eli had hosted his parents in his one-bedroom Brooklyn apartment once a year. He loved his mom and dad, truly, but his back always hurt from sleeping on the couch, and his head always spun with the myriad of museums his mom wanted to visit, and his feet ached from the million miles his dad wanted to walk to see the city, as it was meant to be seen. Honestly, the one good thing about his trip down to Florida was the idea that he could count this as their annual get-together and skip the hosting duties in the new year. "I want to spend time with you too, Mom, but what was I supposed to do? Tell my childhood best friend to get lost?" He waggled a handful of deteriorating paper ornaments at her. "It's your fault that you raised me to be so polite, so when you think about it, you have no one to blame but yourself." "Ha ha, whoa, zing, he's got you there, honey." Eli shot a fond glance at his dad. At least he always laughed at Eli's jokes. Cora ignored her husband entirely. She propped her fists on her hips and said, "I'm going to use my I statements." His parents were both big on I statements. I feel fill in the blank with an emotion when you fill in the blank with an action. It was the kind of thing progressive parents in the 90s learned about in magazines. I feel hurt when you act like it's a chore to be here. Like at the party the other night? I was fresh off a very long flight, Mom. I'm sorry if I wasn't in the mood to watch Uncle Hank get plastered and rant about how the governor is going to force me into a dress. It was a party. You could have tried to have fun instead of moping around. As it was, you couldn't get out of here fast enough. You're the one who sent me to the store, because I didn't know how else to deal with you. Wendell stood slowly, leaving a trailing nest of half-lit Christmas lights on the terrazzo floor. He raised his hands in his usual gesture of peace. Hey. Maybe we should all take a break. The holidays are stressful for everyone. Why don't I mix up a pitcher of sangria and we'll just sit on the lanai and chill out? Eli pinched the bridge of his nose and squeezed his eyes shut. Dad, I have been sober for years. Wendell always seemed to forget that when it suited him. I'll make yours a virgin. That's not a thing. A virgin sangria is just fruit salad. I don't want sangria, Eli's mom said, pointing at Eli with verve. I want to discuss why our only child is so hell-bent on ditching us at every opportunity. I'm not ditching you. I'm here right now, aren't I? He could feel his pulse ratcheting up. Visions of the doughy governor danced in his aching head. Even though this isn't the most welcoming spot in the world. Cora's hand flew to her mouth with a gasp. My home isn't welcoming to you? Honey, he probably meant Florida in general, Wendell jumped in. It's not only that, Dad. Eli could see himself as if watching from a great distance, like he was in the audience at a movie theater. There he was on the big screen, about to make a huge fucking mistake, but all he could do was eat popcorn and let it happen. This whole house creeps me out. What? How? Wendell demanded at the same time Cora wailed, but I just cleaned. Eli focused on his dad's somewhat more coherent questions. The baby photos and the high school photos and all of this stuff. He tore the plastic snowflake ornament off the tree, waving it in the air. This place is a shrine to my dead name. How? Do you think that makes me feel? Use your I statements, Wendell said. Deep breath in. Then, letting it all out, Eli said, when you talk about how cute this picture is, I feel like you don't want me here, not really. You want this kid. He tossed the ornament on the coffee table, the sunny child in the photo grinning up at them. But that's you. Cora dabbed at her damp eye with the inside of her wrist. She always tried to fight off tears when they happened, unsuccessfully. I know you've changed a lot, everyone does, but it's still you. Eli clicked his tongue and looked away. He stared at the tree, at all the crumbling handmade ornaments and the gaudy tinsel. Why had he even bothered coming here? Oh, right, because he was a failure, at pretty much every aspect of being an adult. He glanced over at his mom. She was weeping openly now, tears streaming down her face. She wiped them away with her fingertips. You should have told us. If seeing our old photos makes you uncomfortable, her lip trembled. She looked around the room. From where they stood, at least a dozen childhood pictures were visible in various frames on the walls or standing on tables. Oh, it makes me sad to think about throwing away all these memories. Is that really what you want me to do? I didn't say that. Eli was so tired. His body still ached from overdoing it with Nick, and now his head was pounding. He couldn't begin to think of a solution that would feel right to him, but also keep his mother from dissolving further into tears. He wasn't out to hurt his mom or cause drama, but what could he say when it was clear her precious memories came first? Wendell crossed the room to hug Cora to him, letting her cry against his neck. His eyes met Eli's, and for a moment, Eli wasn't sure if his dad blamed him for the sorry state of their tree-trimming afternoon or not. He didn't really want to find out. He headed for the door, snagging his flip-flops from the shoe rack. I need some air. See you later, he said, and pushed his way outside. The sunset was starting, the sky turning all the colors of sherbet. Eli walked to the end of the driveway before realizing there was nowhere for him to go. There was nothing within walking distance unless he wanted to cross a busy thoroughfare. No stores, no public park, nothing to do. He was trapped in the honeycomb of his parents' suburban neighborhood, hemmed in by palm trees and jacarandas. He needed an escape route. He took out his cell phone to call an Uber. The app informed him that the next available ride was about 45 minutes away, way too long to wait. He swiped out of the app and saw Nick's text messages staring back at him. It wasn't even a decision. Eli pressed the call button before he could think about the consequences. It rang twice before Nick picked up. Eli, hi, how are you doing? He sounded genuinely pleased to be called by his ex. Weirdo. "Oh, I'm spectacular," Eli said, drawing the word out into about 10 syllables. "Can I ask for a favor?" He squinted into the sun. "Can you come pick me up?" Second chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 9, Nick pulled into the sandy parking spot and switched off his headlights. Without the noise of the engine, he could hear the warble of crickets deep in the sea grape bushes. Eli sat in the passenger seat, as motionless and silent as he'd been when Nick had picked him up. When he'd asked Eli, "Where to?" he'd gotten a grunted "anywhere." So here they were. Back at the beach they'd visited the day before. Their beach, or formerly their beach. It wasn't the worst place to spend a night off work. Better than sitting on his couch, zoning out like Nick was wont to do when he had no other plans. "Do you want to go someplace else instead?" Nick finally asked when it became clear Eli was not going to move on his own. Eli blinked, his 1,000-yard stare dissipating as he turned to Nick. Huh. His head swiveled around as he took in the thick dark of their surroundings. There wasn't much to see. They were the lone car in the otherwise empty lot. No, this is fine." They picked their way down the wooden boardwalk that led to the beach. Eli fished his phone out of his pocket and turned on its flashlight so they could see where they were going in the dark. "You'd think they'd have some lights out here," he grumbled. "Turtles," Nick said, a quiet reminder. "Oh, right." Eli's brow furrowed in the shaky light of his phone. "They get all turned around, don't they, when they hatch?" "Yeah," disoriented. "I think they're supposed to aim for the moon, but if there's a bright light, they end up going that way instead." He carefully started down the stairs that led to the sand. No shoes piled up at the bottom at this hour. They had the beach to themselves. Eli clattered down behind him. "Wait, that can't be right. The moon moves." "Oh yeah, I forgot that part." He expected some truly epic ribbing at his expense, but Eli just kicked off his sandals and dug his toes in the sand. He clicked off his phone's flashlight, leaving them in murky blackness for a moment until their eyes adjusted. Nick looked up at the stars overhead, then out to the condos in the distance, windows lit here and there in rows. The waves shushed back and forth down at the waterline. Pretty peaceful. Eli sighed out a huge gust of breath. "I made my mom cry," he said, and started walking down the beach. Nick lost some time untying his shoes and placing them on the last stair, but soon followed. His legs were longer, so it didn't take much time for him. "To catch up, want to tell me about it?" he asked once he was at Eli's side. "Not really." Eli laughed to himself. It was a really pointless argument, embarrassing actually. "Okay." As they trudged across the sand, Nick thought of a million things he could say to keep the conversation going. It must be hard being back here after all these years. Family is tough. "I watched you bomb at the 5th grade talent show when you tried to sing in front of a cafeteria full of 10-year-olds. There is nothing you could tell me that would be more embarrassing than that." But he didn't say anything. He just hoped he'd appear to be a good, trustworthy listener if Eli decided to talk. It did not take long. They hadn't gone more than 10 yards before Eli exploded. "Do you ever get the feeling like your dad misses the kid you used to be? Like he would rather have that kid back than deal with adult you? Or is that just me?" Nick considered his answer. He and his father had always been close. When Nick had been plucking up the courage to ask Eli on their first date, as teens, his stomach turning itself inside out at the thought of ruining his longest friendship on the off chance his feelings were returned. His dad had been the one he went to for advice. Be honest. Try not to faint. His dad was the one who helped him pick out his clothes and style his hair before he and Eli went to the movies on their first real date. Any more gel and you're going to crackle in a stiff breeze. And his dad had been the one to gently explain to his mom that using up an entire disposable camera to take photos of Nick and Eli was probably overkill, and she should let them get going before they missed the trailers. "Why?" Nick asked. "Did your folks say something like that to you?" "Not exactly. It was more like a gesture. Maybe I took it the wrong way." Eli kicked at a seashell, sending it careening into the ocean. Nick watched it go. "I get it. My dad has this image of me in his head, you know? Like he hardly ever updates his mental Rolodex. I'm not 16 anymore, but I dent the bumper of his car one time, and to this day he says, 'Oh, Nick, don't drive at night. That's when you had your accident.'" He mimicked his father's nasally voice, his familiar accent. It wasn't a mean impression, but it was pretty spot on if he did say so himself. It got a laugh out of Eli, at least. "Oh my God, I remember that." "Wait, was I the one driving?" He whipped his head toward Nick with his mouth hanging open. "Holy shit, I was. I backed into that cart in the Walmart parking lot and you took the fall for me. Well, you were still trying to get your license. The memories came flooding back to Nick. Blink 182 on the radio, the vast emptiness of the parking lot after midnight, Eli nervous and sweaty in the driver's seat as Nick tried to talk him through the finer points of parallel parking. The sickening smack as the car backed up a tiny bit too much. You failed that test like 4 times. It was a bad test. Who the fuck needs to parallel park in Florida? There's no street parking unless you go down to Miami, and even then, Eli stopped, coming to a halt in the middle of a nest of dried seaweed. Hold on, your dad still thinks it was you that dinged the bumper. Of course he still thinks it was me. I'm not a narc. Eli threw his head back and laughed long and loud. A clutch of ibises took flight, startled from their perch in the bushes. Nick could see the long curve of their beaks against the starry sky. I can't believe you never told him, and he's still dragging you for it? Dude, I would have blown up at him years ago like, I'm not the bad driver. It was the kid down the street who couldn't fucking drive. There's still time. Think I should? Nick said. He could feel the corner of his mouth twitching, on the verge of busting up too. Oh, absolutely. Maybe save it for his birthday. Eli smiled and turned his head to look out over the dark water. Nick could see his profile picked out against the sky. Now that his eyes were used to the dark, there seemed to be plenty of light to make out his expression as it softened to something more thoughtful. Hey, thanks for bringing me out here. I needed a break. Anytime, Nick said and meant it. It gave him pause, the shock of how much he meant it. If Lori were there, she'd be wondering aloud how funny it was that Nick was making himself so readily available to Eli when historically he wasn't that reliable with anyone else, himself included. Nick was very glad Lori wasn't there. By unspoken agreement, they started heading back down the beach, their pace slow, almost matching the lull of the waves. Eli had his hands in the pockets of his shorts. Nick, who was wearing jeans in deference to the low 70s evening temperatures, was shivering just looking at him. He was content to let the conversation lie where they'd left it, but after a few minutes of silent trudging, Eli spoke again. We were putting up the tree. There were all these ornaments with my baby pictures. The whole story spilled out. How he felt detached from the person in the old photographs, his parents fawning, the way Eli couldn't shake the idea that the current version of him was, on some level, not living up to their expectations. But you're a model, son, Nick protested. Trust me, I would know. The way you left for the city, got a big, important job. Eli looked paler than usual in the moonlight. Yeah, about that. He bit his lip. I'm not exactly employed at the moment. Oh, that was a surprise. But then again, Nick didn't know much about the television industry. So, like, you're in between projects? A bitter laugh huffed out of Eli. Between implies there's something new coming down the pike, and if I'm honest, this might be the end of the road for the all-writing career. He glanced at Nick and shrugged, his face an arrangement of discomfort. The last show I worked on, the lead harassed a bunch of women on set. Totally disgusting. The show got canceled, which, fine, didn't want to write that dickhead any more jokes anyway. But I'm having a hard time getting a new gig. Or even having someone return my calls. Shit, Nick said with feeling. But I thought you said you were working on your friend's new show, the queer ensemble thing? Eli sighed. I mean, I gave Margot a hand with a few little things, but if she doesn't sell it, I won't see any money for that work. Honestly, I'm not going to hold my breath. Friends of Dorothy is a long shot. Didn't you say it was really good? It is, absolutely. Margot's a genius, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything, not in this industry. Eli shrugged. Now I'm not sure what's next. I might need to move back here for a while, come up with a plan, get back to my stand-up roots somehow. Did you enjoy that? He asked. The stand-up? He wondered if any of Eli's performances could be found online. Maybe he could look it up tonight. Eli made a so-so gesture with his hand. I liked parts of it. Feels like a step backward, though. Nick knew a little bit of how Eli might be feeling. When Nick finished college and moved back home to start working at the Manatee, his parents had been not unkind, but definitely confused. His mom had asked repeatedly, "Is this really what you want to do? What do your folks think?" he asked. Eli looked downright ill. I haven't told them. They think I'm still working, actually. Nick tried not to let his surprise show, but apparently that was impossible. Eli knew him too well. Yep, that's me, Eli said. Winner of the Worst Son of the Year award for not only hiding my employment status, but also for making my mom cry over fucking Christmas ornaments. Also terrified of having to come back here, no offense. None taken. I get how it would feel like a downgrade. Nick shrugged. I didn't have the easiest time when I decided to put down roots here, and I didn't have to worry about the governor trying to legislate what I could wear on school campuses. A look of grateful relief took over Eli's face. Exactly. He blew out a breath. Wow, did not mean to get this deep. He laughed, but it was strained. Then he turned toward the water. Want to go swimming? Nick stopped in his tracks. What? Eli was already stripping his shirt over his head. Come on, shit's too heavy, I need to do something silly to balance it out. Why night swimming? Why not? We used to when we were younger. He flashed a smile, all teeth. They'd done it exactly twice, by Nick's recollection. Once before they started dating, right after Eli finally passed his driving test and got his license. A celebration of sorts. The tension between them palpable, Nick at 16 averting his eyes when Eli's denim miniskirt and crop tank top hit the sand, and again after. Well, after their first time. Losing your virginity on a beach sounded romantic, but it was uncomfortably sandy in reality. They'd plunged naked into the ocean, and that time, Nick had looked as much as he liked. He realized he had zoned out, and his gaze was currently somewhere around Eli's bare navel. He looked away with a cough. Well, for one thing, I didn't bring a towel. Even to Nick's ears, it sounded like a pathetic excuse. Something an old man who was more worried about his car upholstery than living life to the fullest might say. You can towel off with my shirt, Eli said. Nick scanned up and down the beach. They were totally alone still. I don't know, he said, wavering. Suit yourself, I'm going in though. Eli shucked his shorts down to his ankles, revealing dark underwear. Nick averted his eyes yet again before he could make out any details and ran down to the water, whooping the whole way. Nick lifted his gaze once Eli was far enough away that it didn't feel too weird. He watched the pale beacon of Eli's bare back as he trudged through the waves, finally submerging where the bottom fell away. He splashed around in the gentle waves and hollered, "It feels great, not even that cold." He scrubbed his wet hands over his face and through his hair. It stuck up in points, darker now that it was wet. You sure you don't want to come in? His voice echoed in the dark. Fuck it. Nick dragged his shirt over his head and dropped it onto the sand. By the time he'd stripped down to his boxer briefs, Eli had noticed him undressing. He stuck his fingers in his mouth and gave a loud wolf whistle as he treaded water. Shut up, Nick called to him. He made his way down to the water with more caution than Eli had, hissing as he got wet. In the summer, this stretch of ocean was as warm as a bath. Now, though, it was chilled to freezing, at least to Nick's lifelong Floridian sensibilities. He steeled his jaw to keep his teeth from chattering as he waded up to his knees. This part is always the worst, he said, calling over the sound of crashing waves so Eli could hear him. Cold water up to your waist, it's torture. Don't be such a baby, it's not that bad. Eli started floating on his back, his gaze riveted to the night sky. Promise me you won't make any jokes about shrinkage. Nick sucked in air through his teeth and took the last shuffling step that brought the water up to his chest. Excuse me, shrinkage hasn't been funny since 1996, Eli said. Give me some credit. Anyway, I'm not a fan of small dick jokes for obvious reasons. Nick bobbed in the water. What? Why? I'm trans. Eli righted himself so that he was bobbing too. His tone sounded like he was very close to adding a duh to that statement. People talk about cis guys having small dicks, and the joke is always that he's either not a real manly man, he dropped his voice to a deeper register, or that he's some aggro asshole trying to compensate. His voice went back to normal. You can see why I might be tired of it. Eli, Nick said, I'm Asian. I know all about small dick jokes. Yeah, but you know you've got a big dick. Eli swept his arm through the water, sending a miniature tidal wave in Nick's direction. It would have splashed him in the face if Nick hadn't twisted to the side with a shocky laugh. It's not that big, Nick said, still laughing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had such a ridiculous conversation. I remember it differently. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here with my small dick with no good comeback except, like, I'm trying my best. You really have a distinct, enduring memory of my penis and its dimensions? Don't feel too flattered, Eli muttered. He looked out over the waves. I remember the first subway rat I ever saw, too. That's just the way brains work. Sure. Nick smiled down at the water. He didn't know if Eli would see it in the dark, but he hoped he would. They were treading water farther from shore now, the light of the stars and planets limning the crests of the black waves in white. One particularly strong wave came from nowhere and washed over Eli's head, leaving him sputtering and wiping salt water out of his eyes. Nick tried to school his face out of its goofy grin. There was a bubble of something frothy and buoyant in his chest, something that startled him with its intensity and unfamiliarity. Oh, right. Fun. He was having fun. He didn't do that much these days, did he? Immediately the arguments rushed in, his mind filled with reasoned thoughts that would banish that too tender one. He had lots of fun with Zoe. She was the light of his life, an endless fount of wonder. Nick could survive on one of her giggles for weeks, but this was different. Something inside him whispered. As much as he loved Zoe, he couldn't deny that parenthood was exhausting. When was the last time he'd taken a few minutes out of his day, or night in this case, and had fun all for himself? Was it selfish to want that? A little time just for him? Hey, you okay? Eli swam in front of him. It's not too cold for you, is it? No, Nick said way too quickly. It feels nice once you get moving. Something brushed his ankle, probably seaweed, but Nick jolted, paddling closer to Eli. In the dark, in open water, everything seemed more dangerous to the lizard part of his brain. Eli laughed at him. You sure? Yeah, just. Nick caught the look on Eli's impish face, wavering between mirth and concern. Beads of water dotted his neck, dripped from the ends of his hair. He was really beautiful, handsome. Not that men couldn't be beautiful, but Eli might not like being thought of that way. Although, in the privacy of his thoughts, Nick didn't see the harm. Maybe being selfish wasn't the end of the world. He crossed the short distance between them, swimming up to Eli until they were nose to bobbing nose. Eli's eyes went wide, catching moonlight. Could we? Nick raised his hand and touched Eli's slick shoulder. He telegraphed his movements as best he could, slow and careful, drawing himself closer. The waves pushed him along so that it took hardly any effort at all. He leaned in, still waiting to see if Eli would pull away. He didn't. It was barely more than a peck, Nick's mouth brushing against Eli's, the taste of salt between them. And yet the chill of the water seemed to fall away, and Nick felt enveloped instead by urgent heat. Eli's mustache tickled at his lip, a novel experience that made Nick shiver. Then it was over, and Eli's breath was against his cheek, and Nick opened his eyes to see a very pale face staring back at him. Why did you do that? I thought, Nick floundered. Pretty literally, once he let his hand slip off Eli's shoulder. Didn't you want to? A disbelieving huff left Eli's lips. Jesus Christ, Nick. He turned and started swimming toward shore, arm over arm. Nick floated there in the dark water for a moment. Fuck. His stomach sank to his toes, so heavy that he could have been dragged to the bottom of the sea. He forced himself to follow with a loud splash. Wait, Eli, hold on. Eli did not hold on. He staggered through the breakers, leaving the water with no grace at all. Nick watched the pale shape of his naked legs trudging up the sand to where their clothes were. Nick made his own ungainly exit from the ocean and jogged to catch up. Eli was clothed in his shorts by the time Nick reached him, shaking out his shirt to find the right way to put it on. He didn't even look up at Nick's approach. Nick reached for his arm, then thought better of it. His hand dangled uselessly at his side. Look, I'm sorry. I thought I was getting some kind of vibe. Doesn't mean you have to act on it, Eli said to his shirt. It wasn't a denial, Nick noticed. So there was something there. It wasn't just me. Eli sighed and dropped his shirt lower, tilting his head to stare at the sky. What is your deal? You never used to be the type to go fishing for compliments. I'm not looking for compliments, I just want to know what I did wrong. Eli whirled on him. Where do I even start? Nick, you're straight. So? That was perhaps not the best response because Eli blinked furiously, rearing back with his mouth hanging open. So I'm not. I am in fact a gay man. Maybe you can conveniently forget that, but I can't. Now Nick's mouth dropped open, this time in horror. I didn't forget. Yes, you fucking did. Eli stooped and snatched Nick's pants from the sand, tossing them his way. Nick caught them on instinct, but the rest of him was frozen in place as Eli continued to talk. I get it, okay? We've done a lot of reminiscing about the good old days, so it makes sense that all that would go to your head. But nostalgia isn't enough. Eli finally got his shirt over his head, his torso disappearing into the fabric. He tugged the hem in place. You remember me as someone else, someone you used to kiss? I'm not that person anymore. That's not true, Nick said. I don't look at you and see. He bit his tongue, keeping it trapped between his back molars. He didn't want to lie. He was doing his best to see Eli as just a regular guy, but even that way of thinking regular, didn't that prove he thought of Eli as irregular? Hadn't he had an argument with himself mere moments ago about thinking of Eli as beautiful? I didn't realize I was being disrespectful, he finally said, quiet and ashamed. Sorry. It won't happen again. Yeah, it better not. Eli fished his phone out of the pocket of his shorts. The screen lit up his face, casting it in an eerie glow. It's getting pretty late, we should get going. Right, Nick nodded a few times. Of course. Eli waited a beat. You should probably get dressed, he added. His gaze stayed pointedly on Nick's face. Said face went hot. Yep, doing that. Doing that now? Nick babbled as he stuck his wet leg into the jeans that were still in his hands. The ride back to the Ward's place was going to be so awkward. He just knew it. Not only because of the damp denim, one of his least favorite sensations in the world, but because he couldn't conceive of a way for them to get back to their easy camaraderie after what had happened. Eli busied himself with retrieving Nick's button-down from the ground and shaking the sand out of it. Hey, I don't want this to, explode everything, he said, his voice soft. We've been friends since we were 3 years old. I'd like to stick with that if it's all right with you. Absolutely. Nick took the offered shirt from Eli and shrugged it on. Friends. Better than he could have hoped for, given the circumstances. For a moment there, he'd been convinced Eli would never speak to him again, and they'd go back to being nobody to each other. Nick could be happy with friends. Friends were good. Lori was always on his case about how he didn't have enough of them anyway. But as they made their silent march back to the car, Nick couldn't help but feel that Eli was wrong. Nostalgia wasn't the only thing urging him to kiss Eli. If it was, surely now that it was all spelled out, he wouldn't want to anymore. And the fact was, he did want to. Maybe a couple more times to get the hang of it because that last kiss had been too brief. He glanced over at Eli walking beside him. His gaze was on the ground, his cell phone lighting the way, concentrating on where to put his feet. Nick, on the other hand, couldn't stop looking at Eli's mouth. There had been a hint of stubble when they'd kissed. That had been new, not bad, kind of cool. This is probably the part where I'm supposed to have some kind of massive gay panic, Nick thought idly. He waited for the wave of anxiety to come, hounded by questions. Was he not as straight as he'd always assumed? Was he bi? Was this really all a subconscious bid to cling to the past, relive his glory days? The panic didn't come. Sure, the questions floated into his head, but they floated away harmlessly. He didn't feel the need to answer them right now. Why rush, especially when Eli had made it clear they were just friends? Want me to drive? Eli said, breaking their long silence. Nick blinked. I could drive if you want. They'd reached the parking lot by that point, and Eli made a big deal of looking around at the empty spots that surrounded Nick's loan car. There's not a lot for me to back into right now, but I could probably make it happen, for old time's sake. A startled laugh escaped Nick's chest. This was why, he knew. This was the reason he felt the way he did about Eli. Sure, it was complicated and confusing, and perhaps not what was supposed to happen at all, but he had fun with Eli. He laughed more than he usually did, and he felt better. Like he was more himself. It was selfish, but Nick wanted to keep that feeling in a small fishbowl inside his chest, where he could tap on the glass from time to time and watch it swimming around. He didn't have to share it with anyone. Eli had made it clear that he didn't feel anything close to it, after all, but Nick could keep it for himself, just to enjoy it. He dug around in his pocket for his keys. I think I'll do the driving, if you don't mind. Eli put his hands up in a gesture of defeat. All right, fine, but the offer's open. Any time you feel like your pristine bumper needs a couple of dings, I'm your man. Not really, Nick thought as he unlocked the car. Eli would never be his, not again. Second Chances in Newport Stephen Chapter 10 December 20, Why did we have to come here? Grammy K asked as the extended Wu family fought their way through the Auntie Anne's, scented hellscape that was the Newport Stephen shopping center in December. We could have gone to the mall up in Pine Beach. No one was ever abducted in broad daylight from the one in Pine Beach. Oh, yes, I saw that one. Unsolved mysteries, Tianyi said. Did they ever find the boyfriend? No, Dad, that's why it's unsolved. Nick hefted Zoe higher on his hip and squinted up and down the length of the mall's main artery, trying to determine which way Santa's village was. The wayfinding in this place was terrible. Sometimes they solve them, Kay said with unexpected optimism. DNA. That's how you do it these days. Tianyi made a sound of polite interest. So she does believe in certain types of science, he said to Nick in Hokkien, the dialect Nick had grown up speaking at home. I suppose that's something. Nick's dad and Lori's mom, a retired nuclear engineer and a believer in mind-altering chemtrails, respectively, had had many debates about science in the past. "Be nice, Dad. It's the holidays," Nick answered in kind. His Taiwanese wasn't as good as his dad's, but decent enough. His Mandarin would never hold a candle, though, along with the 5 other dialects his dad spoke that Nick had no hope of mastering. He felt a twinge of bittersweet longing in his chest. He wished his mom were here. She'd have kept Nick's dad in line with a single glance. "Can we please table the case of the missing blonde woman from the 80s, at least until after Christmas?" Lori pointed to the left. "This way, I think." She tossed a grin over her shoulder to Zoe. "Excited to see Santa, honey?" "Yes, I'll tell him I've been good this year, and he'll ask me what I want for Christmas, and then we get a picture taken with Santa and me and you and Daddy and Grammy and Ah Gong." She recited the day's rundown, as Nick and Lori had been, explaining it to her for weeks. Nick herded them all in the direction Lori had chosen, walking under the oversized Christmas ornaments that hung ponderously from the ceiling. Crowds of holiday shoppers flowed all around them. The mall's current soundtrack was a rendition of Jingle Bells that several country music stars had recorded a decade ago. Nick wasn't sure if the song was actually 20 minutes long or if they were playing it on repeat. Either way, he wanted to duck into the sporting goods store so he could take a baseball bat to the loudspeakers. It was almost as anxiety-inducing as his dad being in the same 10-mile radius as Lori's mom. Kay and Tianyi were, to put it mildly, 2 very different people. They rarely interacted now that Lori and Nick were divorced, but at least Kay was making an effort to be pleasant. Maybe it was holiday cheer, or maybe Kay was just on her best behavior after that incident at Checkers. "Oh, would you look at that?" Kay scoffed as they passed a shop window displaying tween fashions. Who would want to dress their child in something so skanky? Or maybe not. They finally reached Santa's village, a collection of wooden cutouts painted to look like snow-dusted conifers and cottages situated between the food court and the Dillard's department store. The line of parents and kids waiting to see Santa snaked all the way past Spencer's Gifts, almost reaching the store where you could buy crystals and butterfly knives. Tianyi gave a low whistle. "Looks like a long wait." Zoe twisted in Nick's grip and pointed to the small holiday-themed playground nearby, replete with cotton batting snow among the slides and seesaws. "Can I go play?" Kay turned to Nick. "Why don't you let your dad and I watch her while you 2 wait in line?" Nick would have vastly preferred being the one with the fun job, but he supposed he should give the grandparents some quality time with Zoe. "Okay." He set Zoe on her feet and watched her take Grammy's hand, then Ah Gong's, before walking between them to the playground. Her little shoes flashed purple with every step. Lori heaved a loud sigh as she and Nick joined the end of the line. "This is going fine, right? Mom's not picking fights, at least." "Not unless you count her criticizing your choice of mall," Nick said. Kay wasn't totally off base, though. The other one was much nicer. "Why did we come to this one instead of going to Pine Beach?" Lori rolled her eyes. "The Santas up there are white." "I wanted Zoe to get her photo taken with a Santa of color. She deserves good representation." He craned his neck to get a look at the Santa sitting up on the dais that had been constructed for the occasion, gold throne and all. Lore, the guy's Latino. Lori tossed her hands in the air. "Well, Asian Santas are mighty thin on the ground. This was the best I could do, okay." Deciding that this was not the hill he wanted to die on, Nick held up his hands. "Okay." He tried to imagine getting to see a non-white Santa when he was Zoe's age, but he couldn't quite picture it. Maybe it would have made a positive impact. There was probably no harm in giving it a shot, at least. He made a mental note to try to find some more picture books about East Asian women for Zoe's growing pile of Christmas gifts. The Connie Chung board book he'd bought 2 years ago was falling apart at the spine. To stave off boredom, Nick let his thoughts wander to Eli. A few days had passed since their night swim, and Nick had practiced extreme self-control in not reaching out to Eli. Eli, though, had texted him a photo of Mr. Ward napping on the sofa in their family room, mouth open and eyeglasses askew on his nose. Nick had replied with what he thought was a very friendly crying-laughing emoji that hopefully didn't indicate any one-sided feelings whatsoever. "After this, do you want to get Chick-fil-A for lunch?" Lori asked. Instead of answering, Nick asked, "Hey, do you think I might be gay?" Lori's brows rose until they were hidden under her bangs. Her mouth opened. and shut a few times before she said, "Do I think you're what now? Gay, or like some flavor of queer?" Nick glanced around, but everyone else in line was focused on managing their fussy children or beating the next level of Candy Crush. No one was paying attention to their conversation. Did that ever cross your mind? Just curious. She dropped her gaze and furrowed her brow. That was her serious face. "No, I don't think so." "Why do you ask? You probably know me better than anyone. With the exception of maybe Eli, who'd known him since before they could even remember. Wondered if you had a take on it." Lori nodded a few more times, then stood on tiptoe to watch Zoe climbing over a gingerbread playset, Kay and Tiani both taking pictures with their phones. It was good that they both had the excuse of watching her. Eye contact during a conversation like this was not easy. "Is this about Eli?" she asked. Her voice was carefully modulated, the way it had been in couples counseling, stripped of even the barest hint of judgment. "How'd you know? Doesn't take a detective. He's the only new thing to come into your life in a while." "Well, come back into your life, I guess. And you told me when we started dating that you only had one other serious relationship, and it was in high school, so I connected the dots. He's your ex, right?" "Got it in one." He was kind of impressed that Lori hadn't said ex-girlfriend. "Have you talked to Eli about this?" Lori asked. "Nah, not really. Don't know if it's a good idea," Nick said. No way was he telling her about the failed kiss. "Some things you just couldn't tell your ex-wife, no matter how close you were." He felt something brush his fingers, and he looked down to find Lori's hand slipping into his. That was a surprise. They hadn't been very touchy-feely since the divorce. Hugs, hello, and goodbye sometimes, but nothing else. She squeezed his fingers, and their eyes met. "I wouldn't care if you're gay," she said. He knew that. He wouldn't have even broached the subject with Lori if he hadn't been sure she was cool. Hell, he would never have married her. But still, hearing her say it out loud made him feel warm inside. "Thanks, Lor." He squeezed back, "but I don't know if I am, honestly." Her hand slipped out of his. "How can you be so calm about this?" she asked. "Most guys in this situation would be panicking." "Guess I'm not most guys," he said. Lori made a gesture Nick privately called her, "What the fuck?" Move, twisting at her waist with her hands palm up like she was asking some unseen audience to weigh in. "That's it? You like a guy for the first time and you're like, oh well, I've liked him before." "Yeah, when he was a woman, that doesn't count." "I think it does." He frowned. "And I don't think he was ever a woman, actually. We just didn't know it at the time." "Okay, yes, my bad. But here you are, 20-some years later, and you're not freaking out at all about this new development where you might be kind of gay?" Nick thought about it carefully before answering. "There is a little, I guess you'd call it an indignant feeling, like I'm almost 40. Why am I only now realizing that I might not be straight? Which makes me wonder, maybe it's nothing. If it were something, wouldn't I have figured it out years ago? Then again, look at Eli. He didn't come out until he was in his 30s, so maybe it's not that weird." He took another step forward as the line moved, gently guiding Lori by the elbow so she wasn't holding anyone up. "To be honest, I'm fine with not knowing for sure for right now. Either way, nothing changes, right? I'm still the same person with the same life. And the same completely platonic relationship with Eli." He didn't have all the words to describe what a delight it was to be discovering a new part of himself. At his age, he'd almost given up on uncovering anything new or noteworthy, but now that there was a chance that he wasn't done growing, he found himself kind of excited. Not having a label for it yet wasn't a huge crisis. In a way, it was a relief. Lori eyed him for a second. "Well, I'm glad you seem to be taking this in stride. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Lor. Sorry to be dumping all this on you. I know it's kind of above the pay grade for an ex-wife." She hip-checked him, her arms folded across her chest. "Shut up. You know I'm always there for you if you need to talk." "Hey, goes both ways," Nick said. Then, wishing Eli were there to hear it, he joked, "Like me, maybe." Lori snickered. "Dork." Then she lapsed into what seemed like a thoughtful silence, her gaze going distant. They shuffled forward another step as the line moved. Lori spoke up once more. "Have you ever thought that maybe you're—" She bit her lip. "Maybe I'm what?" Nick asked. "Look, I'm just a straight white girl here. I'm not exactly an expert in human sexuality, so I should probably keep my damn mouth shut." "No, please, might be useful for me to hear it." That seemed to make her fold pretty quickly. "Well, I was wondering, have you ever considered you might be—" She waggled her head like she did when she was trying to broach a delicate subject. "Demisexual?" Since I have no idea what that word means, no." "I have not considered that," Nick said. "What is it?" I think it's like, again, not an expert, just read an article in Allure one time, but when someone is only attracted to people they have a deep emotional bond with. Nick screwed his mouth to one side. Isn't that how everyone operates? Not really, Lori said. I think most people can be attracted to a stranger if they think they're hot. I can appreciate a hot stranger, Nick protested. Oh yeah. Lori scanned the busy mall before pointing to a woman standing about a dozen yards away next to the S-Baro. What about her? Nick sighed and tried to get a look at the woman without appearing too creepy. Thankfully, she was busy. Texting on her phone, she was objectively gorgeous. Dark skin, high cheekbones, a sleek sweater dress hugging her curves, delicate corkscrews of hair framing her face. She's very pretty, Nick said, facing ahead again. And, Lori prompted. That's it. What do you want me to say? Nick balked. Not all men are sex-crazed animals who can't stop thinking about getting laid. That earned him a glare from the mother in front of them. Nick grimaced in apology, comforted by the fact that her baby was small enough to be resting against her shoulder. It wasn't like any of this was going to penetrate. He lowered his voice. Do you walk around thinking about sleeping with every attractive man you cross paths with? No, but I can picture it if I want. Can you? Nick glanced back at the woman in the sweater dress. As he watched, she was approached by another woman about her age, and they greeted each other with jubilant hugs. He tried to imagine going up to her and maybe asking for her number. Shit, did people still ask for numbers? But all he could think about was how rude it would be to interrupt. His imagination apparently craved some kind of narrative through line. Did she appreciate goofy action movies? Did she laugh a lot? What was her Monopoly piece? Would she get along with his dad? I mean, not without getting to know someone first, he said. There's nothing weird about that, it's mature. Right, but my point is, lots of people have fantasies that are not grounded in reality. Like, I would never actually walk up to that woman and ask if she wanted to get busy in the Macy's changing room, but I can indulge in a fantasy, can't I? That's so specific. What happened to being a straight white girl? Oh, please, I may be a 2 on the Kinsey scale, but if someone that beautiful was down, Lori stuck out her lips in a pout. I would consider it. Nick shook his head. So sexuality is not black and white. Great, but I still don't think there's anything wrong with only liking people you actually like. No one's saying it's wrong. Well, some people might, but they're dicks. She flipped her hair over her shoulder. Listen, you've only had 2 serious relationships in your entire life, right? Me and Eli. And in both of those instances, you knew us for years before you started dating us. That was true. Nick had met Lori a few years out of college. She worked as a server at the Manatee while going to night school to become a registered nurse, and they'd become close. Lori had liked goofy action movies and board games, and when she wasn't around her mother, she laughed a lot. After Lori left the Manatee to start her nursing career, Nick had stayed in touch, and that had naturally progressed to dating, then all the rest. Nick had never made the connection between that and his long friendship with Eli before they started dating in high school, but it was a pretty similar trajectory, now that he thought about it. He said. He pulled out his cell phone and started Googling. What's it called again? Demisexual. She peered between his phone and the playground where Zoe was throwing around fake snow. It's a flavor of asexuality, so that'll probably pop up too. Nick stopped typing and looked at her. Isn't that when someone doesn't like sex? Because that is not me. It had been a while since he'd last done it, but he always enjoyed it. And he hated the stereotype that all Asian guys were sexless math-obsessed machines. It's not cut and dry, remember? There's, like, a complex rainbow under the asexual umbrella. Lori outlined an invisible rainbow arch with her hands. According to Allure, at least. Nick tried to look less skeptical, but he couldn't have been doing a very good job because Lori rolled her eyes. Read up on it, she said. Maybe it'll click, maybe it won't. I only brought it up because it seemed like a likely candidate if you're looking for a label. Nick had been labeled a lot of things in his life, not all of them flattering. He wasn't sure he was in a rush to apply a new one, but at least if he did, it would be something he picked out for himself. He'd take his time with this one, and if it turned out it didn't fit, he could always take it off again. I'll look into it, he promised, bookmarking a couple of articles that seemed to be from reputable organizations. The ones that promised to fix what was broken, he skipped. Like Lori had said, fuck them. It does seem interesting. I didn't know my approach was so abnormal. Or we could use the word rare, Lori frowned. although I'm not even sure if it really is rare. Different, unique. This is all stuff I can figure out if it comes to it, he said with a smile. Thanks for the insight, whatever happens. And absolutely no pressure to prove my instincts correct, you know. She nudged his shoulder with hers. I could be completely off base. As long as you're happy. Happy. He had been on the verge of rediscovering how happy he could be when he'd messed things up with Eli. Finding a word that best described himself was nowhere near as important to him as figuring out a way to show Eli how he felt. If he could convince Eli he wasn't confused or affected with a case of extreme nostalgia, all the other stuff would follow. He was certain of it. The line moved again, with only the angry woman with the baby in front of them now. Nick beckoned Zoe and the grandparents over. Come on, kiddo, it's almost time to meet Santa. Zoe bounded over, her hair in disarray. Grammy K took a small comb from her purse and hastily tried to tame it. I'm going to ask for a puppy, Zoe squealed as she wriggled away from the combing. Lori shot Nick a pained look. Honey, I don't know if Santa can swing that. It's so cold up in the air when he's flying from the North Pole, a puppy might not be safe. But Alice and her brother Artie asked for one last year and Santa brought it. It's named Pickle and it's really long, like a hot dog. Zoe held out her arms to show precisely how long Pickle was. That's very long, Ah Gong agreed. Nick fussed with Zoe's hair, trying to comb it back into some semblance of neatness with his fingers. He knew she hated the drag of a comb. Well, it doesn't hurt to ask. But remember, Santa can't grant every wish. But it's the only thing I really want, Zoe said. Nick's heart lurched. He could relate. Try to ask for some other stuff too. In case he can't fit a puppy in the sleigh, Lori said, then made desperate eye contact with one of the nearby elves. She made a slashing motion across her throat, and the elf gave a firm nod. Later, when they were paying for the exorbitantly priced, they all agreed photos in their cheesy snowflake-covered frames. Nick took a good hard look at the family portrait. Zoe on Santa's lap, cute as a button. Lori and her mom on one side, smiling stiffly, and Nick and his dad on the other, arms flung over each other's shoulders, a void next to them where Nick's mom would have stood. She'd hated having her picture taken, but she would have smiled wide anyway, her perfect, toothy album face, as she called it. He thought about what Eli had said when they were kayaking, about Christmas being a big letdown after the high of childhood, and he wondered how many more good years he had left to make them count for Zoe. He also wondered if there wasn't a way to try to recapture that magic for Eli. Hey Dad, he said as Kay and Lori argued about who was going to pay for all the pictures, both of them trying to shove their credit cards in the poor cashier's hand. Do you still have that bike you got from a yard sale? Of course. It was a good deal, Tianyi said. Why? I need a favor. To listen full and free second chances in Newport Stephen, please access the website, novelsaudio.com and search keyword Second Chances in Newport Stephen or click the link in the description of this video.
Welcome to novelsaudio.com. We hope you have a relaxing and enjoyable time.